everybody. Today is, what day is today? Thursday, January 11, and we have a really special call today on Crypto G. And this is going to be an extra long call, so I hope that everybody went to the bathroom first because it could go 2, 3, maybe plus hours. I'm really not sure how long it's going to take, but I want it to be a very comprehensive call. And the reason is because there's so much information spread all over the internet, both inside of QSI, outside of QSI. So it's been pretty difficult to follow along, also because this enigma has been ongoing, this almost like a saga that's been ongoing for about, what, 2, 3 years, I think, maybe even more than 3 years. And so even just the activity of trying to find all the information for somebody who's new has been nearly impossible. So that being said, thank you so much to Mimsy, Nick, and Cranker for joining me on the panel today. And I picked them because, well, not only does everybody know who they are, and they always bring such great insights to the call, but they've been here since the beginning. So they're pretty familiar with kind of the ebbs and flows of this. And hopefully I can share some information today that maybe even they haven't heard either. So we'll see what happens at the end of the call when we have some commentary. But without further ado, let me start my screen share. So give me a second on Telegram. Okay, and hopefully everybody can see my screen now. So I'm going to start basically with a brief but not so brief history about Crypto G. I won't start at the very, very beginning of it because there's a lot of kind of wiggle room, but suffice to say, there was a lot of confusion about this token because when it first launched, it was actually called CTG. And then at some point, they had a token swap into what's known as CTGX. And over time, things have kind of changed and shifted along the ways. But one of the main impetuses for this actual token name change is because the CryptoG team said that there was some kind of potential scamming going on and that they may or may not have lost access to certain information. But then, luckily I think it was a couple of months later, the account behind the email address came back and explained that there was some shenanigans behind the scenes, but we're continuing with the project. So let's move on forward with the CTGX coin. So that kind of transitions us to this slide. Now, one of the big reasons why Crypto G, which is the bigger brand underneath Crypto G, is this token called CTGX became so popular and so famous is because it was truly one of the first Jacera assets of all time on the Stellar Dex. It was tied to Satoshi Nakamoto. It was tied to being, I think, the first wealth transfer token, if not one of the first 5 or 10. But it was so early on that we really didn't know too much about Stellar and how it would evolve over time. And so we just knew that this was going to be a massive, massive role. And so a bunch of us, probably hundreds, if not thousands of us, all throughout the Stellar universe, were searching for the answers of the mystery behind CTGX. So that was the first reason. The second reason why it became really, really massive is because both Whiplash and myself separately did deep dives into this account called the Anonymous Group, which has Anonymous Charity over on YouTube. And on top of that, there were a lot of these very interesting connections on the Telegram group, George News. Now, I do want to make a caveat that the George News group on Telegram is not the same as the George News actual magazine itself. So when we discovered this independently, we were like, holy crap, because we had always known that, John F. K. Jr. was behind George News magazine. And so if it were possible that George News Telegram was George News magazine, that would mean either JFK Jr. himself was behind it or his team was behind it. And so that further propelled this legend of Crypto G. Now, along the way, I don't know when this Twitter account opened, but there was a person, or is a person, called Crypto Cypher over in Twitter. And he became really famous because he was pretty much the first one out there who was giving information on the CTGX asset. Now, he remained in the Twitter space. I was not able to use Twitter. I was banned from Twitter a long time ago. So I didn't follow him very much. I just kind of did my own research on my own assets. But I remember this name pretty well because it's pretty well known in the crypto space. And so here's Crypto Cypher. I'm just kind of pulling some pictures up from Sellerpreneur's channel because it shows you that even back in August of 2022, he was showing, if you're trying to do some research into Crypto G, take a look at some of these different transactions and you'll see that there's a lot of interesting information flowing on the ledgers. So keep Crypto Cypher's name in mind, and we'll come back to him a little bit later. So an interesting thing happened because that was in August of 2022. Then in October of 2022, so just 2 months later, Satoshi Nakamoto, in an interview that we had done with Aylin and Kim, had said that when they asked Satoshi Nakamoto, he confirmed that he was not the person behind the CryptoG project. And so that's when I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Okay, so if Satoshi Nakamoto denies it, that must surely mean that Anonymous is the one behind it. And that made a lot of sense because that's what Whip and I had already been discussing based on our decodes. And that seemed to be consistent with a lot of the other information that other groups are finding as well. So also in that same month, if people who have been in QSI long enough since the end of 2022 will remember, suddenly there were so many token swaps going on, countless, probably at least 10, 20 different assets, changing domains, changing assets, which means changing the issuer assets, issuer wallets rather. And so we were really, really busy working with all the developers of these various projects. Some were Bricks projects, some were SPIA projects, but behind the scenes, basically nearly every developer out there that we worked with were suddenly coming into us saying, there's been some kind of hack going on there. We need, more quantum security. Something's going on. We need to have a swap. So the reason why I mention all this is because this happened between the time frame of October 2022 to April of 2023. So this is a pretty long time frame where we're hearing about all of these kinds of narratives of scamming and hacking, which I knew for some part of it, it wasn't true, but for some other parts of it, it seemed to corroborate whatever the CTGX/CryptoG narrative was going on. But in hindsight, now looking almost 1 year later, when you look back at it, that was literally the same time frame that Whiplash began to FUD. And he began to FUD really over this change of narrative because there are so many assets being swapped and so many domains being changed, he was losing track of the reason why it was happening. But because he wasn't studying the actual technology of Stellar, it can be extremely easy to get confused along the way. So basically, all those months, it's all about security upgrades, how it was causing chaos and confusion on the decks. People were frantically trying to figure out what was going on. And so a couple, pointers I want to point to. Here in March, this is a message from Ben, and he says, measures are being taken to enhance the security of our system and to protect your sensitive information. By moving the tokens to a different domain, we can greatly reduce the risk of them being compromised by attackers. So here's Ben, who's, directly confirming that there is some kind of hacking going on. And here's a picture from Timmy, who's he's a big player in the CTGX community. And he was saying that there's so much confusion that all these different tokens are swapping. And so that's what was creating a lot of chaos and havoc because as the CTGX team was posting, they're saying, we no longer really support this token, swap to this token, and then we'll give you extra bonuses if you make the swap. And so around that same time frame in April, I was talking to Ben and I said, is it true that CTGX could potentially be moving to your server? That way they can upgrade officially to a quantum server. And I said, I can't think of a better reason why it keeps changing names and domains, such as Stellar Mint to X-Mint, et cetera, and then eventually maybe a different domain. And we'll come back to that topic later on this call as well. And so at that point, Ben said, well, what else do you think? So I thought, oh, okay, that gets really, really interesting because it could get upgraded to a quantum server that's protected by Stellar Russia themselves. So you guys may remember that this is when I made the post, also in April. I said, speaking of X, OPRX could potentially stand for Operation X in a secondary definition. And so this could be just more proof that everything is about stellar sting ops and that there are baits being set and they basically are ready to catch some of the cockroaches. And that's also the same time frame that Ben started telling me about Project Bridges coming up. So over here, I was just talking about how I personally, because, and this is April of last year, I personally stopped following the narrative of CTGX. It was too confusing and too dramatic. So I personally swapped my tokens out and I put them into Ben's group's tokens because at least that was something safe I could hold on to, knowing that, good or bad, whatever happened to CTGX, even if it, becomes this crazy, amazing asset, it's okay because with Savior, I'm also covered in my bases. And so at that point, I also made a comment saying, I trust Ben and President Putin over George News and Anonymous any day, no offense. And so that's kind of tongue in cheek. Now, keep in mind, those are posts from March and April. I move on to May of last year. And here again, because WHIP started flooding out, here are just some pictures from the developers who are confirming a lot of stuff they're seeing in the background as well. Ralph Amars, Noah Amars, he was talking about how he's trying to tell WHIP that sometimes it's better to work in teams because this collaborative mastermind effort can actually help troubleshoot things faster. And WHIP was telling him, well, they haven't met Daniel, which is Whiplash's name, but God bless them. And then he says, I kneel to no mortal man. So one by one, the developers are seeing that Whiplash's personality has also changed at the same time that his fudding is happening. Over here, Shuvalov is saying, I think WHIP has lost his mind step by step. Because WHIP was starting to say things like, if I don't allow you guys to post anything, then will that ruin the QFS? Because he thinks that he's in charge of the QFS, not the developers. Now, I fast forward 2 months. We're now in the month of July of 2023. And this really gets to some of the height of all of the confusion with tokens. Now, back in 2022, I think it was back in 2021, Whiplash had posted a series of different domains saying that these would be the legitimate stablecoin domains. Now, one of them happened to be this vdcs.io post. And so he was saying that that was the legitimate Vietnamese dong because Mr. Shuvalov from Stellar VBF team himself was the one who made that ICO post. And so even though Shuvalov was saying that that was not the post, WHIP was saying that that was the post. Shuvalov was saying that that was not going to be the official final domain. WHIP was arguing with him, saying that that would be the final domain because it's already been confirmed in the past. And so it had to stay true in the future as well. So behind the scenes, there was a lot of argument between the developers and Whiplash. But then I was able to confirm, finally, that that was actually, again, an incorrect domain. And the reason behind that, the reason why I was able to deduce that is because of this right here. This block, this paragraph, it says, VDCS.io approved the activity of the asset. So if you guys understand the importance of those words, it didn't say that they were the ones who were the official ones. It means that they were monitoring something and the activity of the asset that was being monitored had been approved. The reason why that's important is because as we started to debunk the Vietnamese dong domain, I started to also debunk the crypto Russians domain as well. And in some of these pictures, which I will post these slides for later on after this call when I do the replays as well. But this is really important because the person who had given Whiplash the list of all the different assets and their domains, they listed it in the same place. So see VDCS cryptorussians.ru. And so when you debunk one, there's a chance that you could potentially debunk all of them. And that's precisely what started happening. One by one, I was finding out that per the developers that we work with, those domains were no longer valid. So for people who've been following along, they will know that the actual e-ruble later got launched through VBRF themselves in August, so 1 month after this post. But it's really important to keep in mind that when all this was going on, because Shuvalov and the other developers that we're working with, we now know especially that they are the Q team. Back then, we didn't know. It was just a hunch of mine. It's really important that when they say things like, I can't say if they're working domains, they're not eligible, it was something that we had to pay special attention to because it could have gone either way. But then over time, of course, we were able to confirm that. Now, the reason why cryptorussians.ru is important to keep in mind is because it ties back to CryptoG, which I'll get into later as well. But so I want to blow up some of these screenshots for you guys because it's important to see what the details are so that people fully understand why they're not the legitimate stablecoins. Now, in April of last year, Ralph had said the Dodong was in the works, but it hadn't finished testing. So he confirmed that these were not the legitimate stablecoins. And then a couple months later, Shuvalov said the same thing as well. But on top of that, Ben of Stellar Russia, also said that WIP has an ability of mastering the ways to twist people's words in a way that nobody has ever seen before. And so if you think about that, that's really important because now the developers are proving that not only has WIP fudded, but he's taking people's words, he's twisting them, he's bending them into whatever narrative he wants. And that narrative is what's influencing a lot of the other channels on Telegram, but especially the Stellar related Telegram channels. So we'll come back to that too later. So all these domains are getting swapped out, and all of these tokens are getting swapped out as well. So because it had taken me roughly 3-4 months-ish to actually confirm all this information, I wasn't able to make formal posts until July of last year. So all throughout July and August, I started teaching about something called beta testing assets, which was my way of saying, okay, it made a lot of sense that the developers knew of the domains, and yet for some reason now, almost 2 years later, they're saying they're not the official legitimate domains anymore. And so despite the fact that we had Shuvalov, Ben, and also Kirill from Tokens Foundation all confirming that that's what was going on, WIP was continuing to tell everybody that his old domains were the accurate ones. And so again, guys, that's a massive reason why there was just so much chaos and confusion. Now, shortly thereafter, I had a follow-up discussion with Ben, and that's when he said that these beta test assets will eventually get cheesecaked. And so we discussed this on the cheesecake call that some of you may remember if you've heard that before. But that's how we were able to say, okay, guys, if you've been a part of the beta testing assets and you've already put your money into those, don't worry, the valuation of what you put in there is going to be safeguarded because we knew it was going to be a very confusing process. Now, I'm going to tie in some of the pictures from other calls as well, because I want people to kind of understand the flow of how the information is coming. In the Bridge of Bridges call that we did with Mimsy in August of last year, this is actually the full list of the stablecoins. And you'll see that there are quite a bit of them, and these are all the oldest ones that we used to talk about back in 2021, and how they've all been debunked by the developers. And then over here on the right-hand side, you'll see that one by one, the developers are starting to mint the official stablecoin. Here's another slide from the Bridge to Bridges call. And again, this is taken from the perspective of CryptoG and how this ties into all those bridge assets. So again, Timmy's talking about how much confusion there is with the X token. We're trying to figure out, what's legit, what's not legitimate. Why are there so many token swaps, and which teams, more importantly, are behind the various tokens? Because even within the CryptoG/CTGX communities, there are lots of branches and lots of developers who are disassociating themselves with the other developers. So some are working together and some are saying, no, they're not the right ones, we're the right ones. So this was the CTGX community's best attempt at trying to come to a conclusion about all the different assets going on. Then over here, this was done a lot with the help of Stellarpreneur. He made the first connection to see that there was something called crypto bank, and crypto bank was tied to crypto Russians. And so I started digging into that same information as well, found out that crypto ruble, crypto Russians are one and the same. And so earlier when I was saying that crypto Russians was a debunked domain and that tied into the CTG project, which is crypto bank, which is also crypto G, now you can start to see why later on, when we found out that these were the beta testing assets, it's because that crypto bank group was the organization that actually got the nod of approval for a contract to work with the Q team to actually create this project. And again, guys, that's the reason why Satoshi Nakamoto is not involved in it, but there's a big project that is, or a big developer group that is. And also through this discovery, I was able to see that crypto bank, which is this logo over here, has almost the same logo as Cosmos and Atom, which is this one that you see here. And so that's how I was able to figure out that there's a possibility that they actually tie together. So again, if you've listened to the Bridge of Bridges call, then you'll remember that we were talking about how back in May of 2022, both Shuvalov and Ben knew of the Crypto Russia project. And in private messages with Ben, he also knew of the CTGX project. So that told me that that was a really massive Jacera wealth asset transfer project to really pay attention to. So this is basically just to reconfirm that we are 100%, the developers know who they are, and that this is a massive project that connects to CTGX, which also connects to not the Q team itself, but to the contracting team that works with the Q team. Guys, I keep reiterating this because that's a very important distinction to remember, but it's also a very important idea to understand that this is a team that's working with the Q team. This slide is just to confirm that CTGX's project, the main purpose of it was to tie into the Belt and Road Initiative that President Xi Jinping of China is behind. And so it was tying directly into SCO and the Shanghai, not SCO. So this is the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, as well as other BRICS related projects too. So basically at the end of that Bridge of Bridges call, I was able to make the connection that Mt. Gox's Bitcoin was most likely tied to X.com, and that the X and XMT assets were also most likely tied to that. And therefore, I called the legitimate non-scam CTGX assets were tied to BRI SCO projects, which seems to be identifying with the Indus.gold domain and also potentially with Indus payments in Swiss custody. And so that was a really big deal because all throughout last year was the massive discovery of how the SGB token on SwissCustody.org also connects directly with Indus payments. That was a massive decode that Nick had done basically throughout the year. So it couldn't have been a better indicator of how massive this project is. Now, one other thing I want to add that got also very interesting is of all the interviews that we've ever done with Ben from Stellar Russia, this was the only interview that's ever been canceled, rescheduled, canceled again, and then we never actually scheduled a follow-up call on that. And so I thought to myself, why would Ben do that? Because Ben is usually excellent at following up. And oftentimes, if I don't follow up with fast enough, he will actually say, hey, when are we doing the next call? Here are my available dates. And so the fact that he didn't follow up with me on that told me that there was something really, really big happening behind the scenes. Now, at the time, I couldn't tell the channel, but I thought it was because of the Antarctica stuff and the Arctic stuff, because that's actually when Kirill, a couple days after Ben had canceled this final call, it was actually a couple days before Kirill had told me that he's heading off to Mars for about a week or so. So I was like, holy moly, like something's massive happening because there are now multiple developers flying to the Arctics for a secret meeting, and then Kirill's heading off to Mars. So I thought that that was actually what the reason was behind Ben canceling this call. Ended up not being the real reason, but I'll get into that towards the end. Now, I've taken y'all through the timeline of January up until kind of August timeline of last year. Now here comes September. And September is when this token called NOR is minted. And it was only 1 week after Ben canceled the call that NOR became tokenized. So I thought that that timing, excuse me, was also very interesting as well. And so from here on out, I'm also going to show, actually probably more in the next section, but I'm going to start showing a lot of the research that's been done by people like Timmy and others, but predominantly Timmy because he seems to be really the main researcher behind the CTGX groups. And other thing I wanted to pay attention to is at the same time, we also noticed that because of Timmy's research and his knowledge into this token in the family of assets, he starts becoming good friends with Whip, who then reposts a lot of his information. And simultaneously, he also becomes the admin of the CTGX X and NOR channel. Now, I'm going to shift gears for a quick second and go back to what we had talked about 1 month later, which is now October of last year. This information maybe not everybody has seen before because when I posted it, I had posted it inside of the QSI chat and not on the main announcements channel. And so some people might have missed it. And the reason why I posted it in the chat is because I didn't know how much information other people would care about that. I just knew that it was relevant to the QSI community. But this is the credit of a lot of different people because they were able to piece together that one of the massive wallets in this equation is actually a horrendously infamous scam wallet. Now, this one, which I won't say the entire wallet address because it's too long, but it's the one that ends in ADOD. And it's very, very important to pay attention to this wallet because this wallet gets brought up time and time again as what's known as the Department of Defense wallet, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But so this narrative starts flying around for about 1.5 years, saying that there is an official Department of Defense wallet on the Stellar DEX. And it's connected to the Indus domains, and it's also behind some of the assets on CTGX. And yet at the same time, the people who are really doing the research behind it, who actually understand how to use the ledgers, they found out that this DoD wallet, which is not a Department of Defense wallet, is actually denied to massive scam domains such as ISO 20022.finance, lobster.co, eToro.forex, and many more. So if you've never heard of these assets, at least this may be familiar with you. When you're on your Stellar wallet and you're receiving countless airdrops of shitcoins, most of them had belonged to either ISO 20022 Finance or Lobster.co last year. They were some of the most prevalent money launderers on the DEX. There was another one called eToro.forex, which we'll also get into more detail, but this one was very interesting because they had started minting assets at the same time that there was a lot of information about the actual eToro exchange that was coming into the news. And so these scammers were basically tying minting of assets to the news to make it seem like they are very credible assets. So I'm going to read this now because I want people to understand how did this ADOD wallet become known as the Department of Defense wallet that's connected to Indus. Back in October of 2021, there was a private conversation between Whiplash, myself, and somebody who I will nickname as BN. And in that conversation, BN tells Whiplash, by the way, I've discovered a very interesting wallet and it ends in DOD. and the Federation address is stellarman777 at lobster.co. And the reason why it's interesting is because this wallet is minting countless tokens that all have what's called a quantum sounding token name. And so when he presented this information to Whip, Whip's response was, oh, there's no coincidences. So from then on, he assumed that this ADOD asset wallet that was minting all these quantum sounding names must be Department of Defense. Then further on that conversation on a totally separate day, this BN character is talking about the stellarfunds.org domain and a lot of the other commodities domains that we've been launching through Indus. But for whatever reason, Whiplash decided to smush all those messages together. And anybody who knows Whiplash very well will know that Whiplash always deletes his PMs and even his chats sometimes. So he actually can't go back and refer to these conversations because he has no record of them. So in his mind, he's lumped two separate conversations together, and he now believes that the DoD wallet is not only Department of Defense, but it's also connected to Indus, both of which are incorrect. And instead, the DoD wallet is a very, very prevalent scammer wallet on the Stellar DEX. So guys, this is so important to know because you've seen countless times how Whiplash has actually twisted facts, made something what it's not, and through his misunderstanding, aka miscommunication, he's then able to start promoting something that's actually a scam, not even realizing they're scams because in his own mind, he's twisted all the facts. I'm going to show you another example of when this happened. If we talk about eToro.forex for a quick second, now even Freaky, who's our head bully, she had sent to Whiplash in PM this map she had created of all of these different assets and how it all ties to scammer wallets. So she sent the map to Whiplash. She even told him, this is in green in the middle, she even told him, I made the same thing, but a bigger map for you for like all the tokens that you're promoting. And from what I've seen based on the ledgers, what you're promoting is a huge web of scammers that's connected to all these fake channels and fake developers who are pretending to be BlackRock, Swiss, etc. So over here, Freaky's saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe, like, eToro, this thing is crap. I've literally just given Whiplash my evidence. And again, he's twisted it around and said, Freaky just showed me the proof that eToro is not only a legitimate domain, but it's connected to what Detective calls the 2PNY wallet. And he now thinks that eToro is part of an operation to catch the cockroach scammers. So again, just more evidence that when I say Whiplash twists words, it's not just me or my words. It's not just the developer's words. He's twisting Freaky's words. He twists other people's words. It's anybody who tries to correct him, he will twist people's words. Now, once we started exposing the eToro domain as a scam and how that was connected to the lobster.co scam, suddenly the developers that Whiplash was working with started reacting extremely negatively to us. So here's just the proof of how not even me at the beginning, these are proof that other people have found that connects those domains. And everybody was questioning, going, hey, what happened? All these tokens that were just sent to us under eToro, suddenly on the ledger, in the actual asset itself, the TOML file changed and it now says it's lobster.co. What's going on? And then many people understand that the eToro.forex list of assets, a lot of them started going under clawback, which means the developer was taking back, they were quote unquote recalling the assets from people's wallets. They were not getting compensated for this, which meant the developer is literally just taking your assets with no explanation, giving you nothing back for it. So it was a huge scandal at the time. Okay, so now, as soon as this is July 10 now, as soon as I started posting all of these proofs that other people have found, confirming that eToro.forex is a scam, Again, Whip's developers are the one who jumped to their defense. And Clown.hey says Emily says that eToro is a fake scam, but she doesn't understand that it's one of the biggest investment companies promoting Stellar. So as usual, she thinks that I'm the one that's lying. She says, I'm sticking to bullshit. And Whiplash is also defending her and attacking Ralph Amars, who's the head of SPIA. So there's a lot of attacks flying back and forth between the channels because I'm defending the research, which are facts, saying that they're scams, and they're launching new assaults on us. Now, one thing to pay very close attention to is Clown is the one defending eToro and Lobster.co. Remember, Lobster.co is a massive scam. eToro is the one that was clawing back assets and not paying people out. So why would Clownda, who Whip thinks is a legitimate developer, defend two different domains that are scams? Another thing to think about is of all the different developers that I work with, there's not a single one who defends any asset of any other developer. So as an example, even when these developers, Whip's scam developers, are attacking Ralph and Spia, there's no other developer who's coming and saying, hey, he's innocent, this is what's going on, because they know that Ralph can handle himself. And on top of that, also Indus Payments developer Ted has already confirmed Ralph at the same time too. So that's enough evidence to know that there are massive teams behind the scene and they're all interconnected. But over here, Clownda is jumping out of the bait, not only to defend those assets, but more importantly, to attack us and call me the scammer. So that shows you that emotionally, this developer who claims she's not tied to those assets definitely are tied to those assets. There's another proof that I'm not going to share on this presentation because it's a little bit more confidential information, but there was one message that I specifically sent to test Clownda and the two Scamet developers, Annette and I don't remember the other names because I just remember them as Scamet 1 and Scamet 2. But there are two Scamet developers that Whiplash works with, and I was testing to see how they would respond to it when I posted this information. And sure enough, they fell for the bait, and they were able to confirm in my mind that not only is Clownda connected to eToro and Lobster.co, but more specifically, they're tied to Miriam, Rocky, and Juan. And that information I did send over to our developers. So Whip, his developers that he works with have all failed KYC. Whip knows this because Ben told both Whip and myself long before I cut ties with Whiplash. So if you're developers and you're supposedly legitimate developers and you've already been KYC'd in the past, there's actually no reason that prevents you from being re-KYC'd. It's not moral. There's no ethical reason behind it. You're not breaking any NDAs because theoretically you're under the same existing NDA if you're the first person. And at the same time, even though we're trying to remind everybody of this, Whip's developers refuse to re-KYC with SPIA or with BRICS. So that got very, very interesting for me. Now, Ben here in the middle says, it's only a matter of time until everyone realizes that Whip decided to partner with scammers. He also said Whip is in his own world. I don't know why he pushes so hard to collaborate with scammers. And Shuvalov, again, is confirming that if you've already KYC'd before, you should be able to KYC again. There's literally no reason why you cannot do two different KYCs. Ralph Amar says, I've already informed my developers that none of us will be working with Whiplash anymore because he's gone to the dark side. Evgeny Shuvalov says, this big figure, meaning Whip, has an even bigger background. The big figure that has an even bigger background that now went out of his mind because of some small pigs that squawk into his ears. So he's referring to Whiplash being a big figure in this community has gone crazy because of some small pigs, meaning Khazarian scammers, who are whispering dark energy thoughts into Whiplash's ear, corrupting him. And Shuvalov also says, I think it's pretty clear that someone chose the bad side. So, and also the last thing I want to mention on this slide is this entire time, Whiplash was saying that a lot of the things that I've been calling scam assets are not scam because he believes that eToro.forex is connected to the Pendulum team. I don't mean the fake German team, but the Pendulum.pw team, which is also known as Tokens Foundation. Tokens Foundation's developers are John Miller and Kirill. So as soon as Whip said that, I forwarded the information to Kirill himself, and I said, this is what Whiplash sent. He said, Whiplash says, I would throw a tenner on it, meaning he would bet that Pendulum, aka Kirill, is behind eToro.forex. And Kirill's just like, because he's over all of Whip's BS and made up narratives as well. So Kirill is also confirming that he is not behind eToro Forex. So I know that we talked a lot about the different scammers on the Stellar Dex, and some of you who are listening to this call might think, oh my gosh, what? And I thought this call was about CTGX. I promise you guys, it's all connected. Now, at the end of last year on December 27, we had a big MOAD called the Mother of All D classes, and we learned that our Stellar developers are actually the Q team themselves. And so we posted that call in 3 different links because it was almost a 4-hour-long call. But when I made the post for the replay link, I specifically in here, I mentioned how we have unmasked the Q team. And I'll read this box right here. It says, now you know how the CryptoG assets became the beta testing assets because their team was corrupted by NPM, the Black Hat infiltrator. And then after he was caught, Bricks had to create project bridges to secure those assets, and how the developers that we're working with are creating the new CBDCs. So despite all of that, there's another person called We Are the Storm, the Patriot Fight, and he posts, Kazarian is a term used by QSI, and what QSI shows as fact is being misrepresented. And then he starts explaining how before our big, August call, the Bridge of Bridgers call with Mimsy, I had asked for some assistance. Primarily, I asked for Timmy's help, We Are the Storm, the Patriot Fight's help, and maybe 1 or 2 other people. I can't remember who I asked for help back then. But I basically thought, who are some of the most prevalent people in the CTGX space, and maybe they can send me some information that I don't know. So now he's really pissed off, and he's saying that I never once looked at his information prior to making the podcast, and therefore all the information that I put out on the Bridge of Bridgers call was in fact misrepresenting and misinterpreting the information. And it's because on that call, I talked about how my theory is half of those CTGX assets are scams because those are the ones under these wallets that I had found on the ledgers to be extremely questionable. And I also talked about how we were able to confirm that NPM is legitimately a corrupt black hat who used to work with the Q team. He was never in the Q team, but he was contracted with the Q team because he knew so much information. So he was an insider of sorts. And so not only did he accuse me of misrepresenting and misinterpreting the facts, the reason why I didn't look at his information is because I actually was using the information given to me by Timmy instead, because Timmy is much more knowledgeable on the ledgers than I think the majority or maybe all of the CTGX community. So I hope that answers that question for him. So before we segue into some of the interesting information about CTGX and what Timmy's found, first of all, I want to dispel any rumor. Kazarian is not a term that I made up. It is not a term that QSI uses because we, the community, coined it. It's literally something that's existed for over 1,000 years. And we've even done at least 2 calls on it. This one is with Dylan of DSMP. We did a massive call with his huge map. This one over here, it was one that Nick and I had done about exposing the Kazarian Mafia inside of Stellar. and how they were the ones linked to most of the scam assets. And so we were able to tie together what their strategy is. And Nick did a fabulous job showing you with evidence how Miriam is tied to the Kabbalists and how a lot of the other developers and scammers they work with, like Rocky and Kess and all of those, KT, King Troll, they're tied to the Illuminati. So yeah, they're all under the same branch of bad cabal. And this is just a quick picture. This is an amazing map that Dylan did, literally proving the Khazarians have been around for over 1,000 years. So I don't know why We the Storm made that comment, but I'm just letting him know that if he hasn't done the research, there's plenty of research out there to know that Khazarian is a real thing. And that's literally what the White Hats have been fighting this entire time. So maybe he needs to do a little bit more research into this topic. So now let's dive more into the Moad and the after effects. After the Moad, it seems that Timmy may have seen the video, or if he didn't see the video himself, then maybe he was just hearing other people give a synopsis. Now, I don't know. I don't know which one he did, but he starts giving his own theories on Q. So I'm going to start reading some of this now. He wrote, this is December 28th, so it's the same day that I posted my Moad replay call. It's one day after we actually had that call, so it is a possibility that maybe he did listen to it. I'm not sure. But he wrote, breakdown of Q. So Q plus is the quantum computer at the Galactics. Then you have Ben, John Miller, Kirill, Ivan, Kim, and he says, Anne, question mark, and they make up the main people that we know of. But he forgot to mention White Hat Home in there. Then he also mentions Alan, Shuvalov, and Elon Musk. So that's actually the team of the 9 humans, but he only put 8 of the humans on there. Then he goes on to say, so thank you for giving me the credit, Timmy, I appreciate that. Then he goes on to say, it seems pretty tidy within our little stellar circle of collaborators we have going, unless there's another person missing in that top list with Ben, John, and Kirill. So Timmy's suggesting to his community that there's a person who's in the Q team whose name that I left off. He then starts to talk about how if somebody split off from the Q group, would it help to conceal their identity while they continue to do the work? If so, who could that be? Is it anonymous? Do they tie to Crypto G? Some might say they're the ones behind Crypto G. We have dug up the proof on this. So I say, nope, he's wrong, because there's not somebody else who's split off from the Q team. However, it is true that anonymous ties to Crypto G. Then over here, he's saying, okay, so Crypto Russians equals Crypto G. We see a split, and it sounds like some of them are working with Space Force and Ben through Anonymous. No, guys, ever since the split, they are not working with Space Force, which means they're not working with John Miller nor Kirill. They're also not working with Ben. That's why all of them said that we're no longer using those domains, we're minting our own assets. But they are working with Anonymous. And so in this last post, he wrote, if I'm not mistaken, Emily said NPM left the Crypto G team and he's impersonating JFK Jr. Yes, that's correct. Would that mean that JFK Jr. left the Crypto Russians team? No, that's incorrect. So in conclusion, for whatever reason, Timmy wanted to change the script of who the Q team is, even though all those players have already been confirmed by the Q team. And I specifically asked all of them, did I leave anybody's name off? And they all said no. So the list over here in the pink box is the correct list, and NPM was never part of it. Okay. He then goes on again, December 28th, and he says, I'm just spitballing here, but those names look a lot like the Q team. Would it be crazy if the one who left became anonymous? And I said, yeah, it's crazy because it's false. So now Timmy in his mind believes that Crypto Russian, which is Crypto G, is the Q team. And he's now saying that Crypto G is, oh, sorry, I just repeated that. So he's now confirming in his own mind that Crypto G is the Q team, and it's not. And so he goes on to start defending his position, and he says, one branch, he's now quoting me from the call, one branch is a legitimate one, but that's also the one that's somehow been involved with NPM and his band of cabal, Rocky, Miriam, and KT. I said, yeah, that's correct. And then I point out that the other branch of CTGX assets, the one that's following the WQCF account, that wallet is tied to, Elon, Sorobon, X token, etc. The NOR token is a scam side. And I say, yep, that's also exactly what I'm confirming as well. And then he also says it reinforces, so I'm reinforcing that Timmy does not know how to read the ledger, and that Timmy and the CTGX community have been bamboozled by Crypto Cypher. And he believes that Crypto Cypher has shown him the real proof of Bitcoin and how the CryptoG wallet is holding onto the Bitcoin inventory. Yes, I'm confirming that you do not know how to read the ledger, Timmy, and I want to prove it to you. So furthermore, he also says, what would the implications be if the team of CryptoG associated with WQCF is the bad branch? That would mean that WQCF is tied to the DoD wallet is bad, and every asset that comes from Stellarmint is bad, and all that ties to Satoshi Nakamoto are bad. And he starts listing all these different assets. Well, guys, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because how is he suggesting that any of that is good? It doesn't make sense because he has no proof that those are good. There's only evidence on the ledger that those are bad. And so he also says, does that really make sense? Without implying much deeper problems with who is being said is Q. And I wrote, incorrect assumptions lead to incorrect analyses. And I told him, I've shown both Timmy and Stellarpreneur, and actually most of the CTGX community, I even showed it to Mr. Vamos a long time ago. I told him that I believe this KTalk wallet they've all been hammering over is actually tied to the scammers. I told them back in early 2022, and none of them believed me. And so it gets very interesting because remember, guys, Satoshi Nakamoto himself confirmed in 2022, October, in the interview, that he's not tied to CryptoG project whatsoever. And if you guys go back and listen to the call on replay, or if you go into the slides, which I'll post later, it has all the evidence that the DoD wallet is a scam wallet. And so therefore, WQCF is most likely also a scammer because of its affiliation with these scammer wallets. Now, for quick clarification for everybody who's not familiar with StellarMint.io, Timmy, if you didn't know this, then shame on you. This should have been the first thing you study. StellarMint.io is a third-party minting company. That means anybody can use them if they pay a fee for it. As an example, even I have paid the service to mint our 3 QSI assets. I forgot if it's either 20 bucks or 100 bucks, but literally anybody in the world, if they decide that they want to mint an asset and they don't know how to use the actual Stellar Dex to mint it, because there is a way to do it through Horizon, and there's even you can even use a Stellar Laboratory to mint it, and many people have. You can do it for free by yourself, but I didn't know how to do that. And back in 2021, I decided to, basically suck it up and pay for their services and mint 3 tokens on Stellarmint. So if what you're claiming right now is that all those assets are connected and it must surely be good, then by your own logic, you're now saying that my QSI assets are tied to CryptoG, which is nonsense. We have no relation to them whatsoever. So anybody can go and fact check me, guys. Please go to StellarMint.com. His name is Daniel. He's a really nice guy. He does great work. There are a lot of great projects on StellarMint.com. Sorry, StellarMint.io. So I'm not saying that every asset is bad. I'm saying whenever you see a token has been minted by StellarMint.io, you have to go and do the research on every individual project and their developers to figure out who they are. because my assets will say QSI, well, ours say qsi.xmint.io, but anybody who's done the research knows that xmint is the same as StellarMint. It's the same company. You can choose which domain you want to have. So we've done it, Beer Token's done it, countless teams have done it. So that just tells you that anybody can use StellarMint.io to mint an asset, and it has nothing to do with the legitimacy of crypto-G. Now, let's come back to Noor for a quick second, because people were asking, how does Noor fit into all of this equation? So one day later, on December 29, Timmy posts, okay, now I'm trying to figure out what side of the split between the two branches of CTGX is good. And he goes on to say, CTGX is tied to the very foundations of Q. What is Q and what Stellar represents? The real project simply cannot be dismissed or understated, as crypto-G is at the center of everything for direction the humanity is headed. On the other hand, we have an offer to exchange CTGX into Operation X. Things went bad. The X token has now been defined as the NOR token. And this project is tied to the KTalk wallet that's bridging Bitcoin into Stellar. And then he even says some crazy notion. He says, in fact, this wallet, so crypto-G, holds 1 million Bitcoin. And that proves that it's tied to the wealth transfer. And then he also says the WQCF is tied to, here it comes again, the Department of Defense account. So do you see, guys, how everything is interconnected? Timmy further goes on to say, it's tied to, so WQCF account is tied to the creation of every asset on Stellar Mint, again, proving that he doesn't understand how Stellar Mint works. And WQCF is authorized to maintain liabilities for USDC, the stablecoin. Well, where is this verification coming from? And then he also says the wallet's tied to Sorobon. Okay, I could see that maybe that's a possibility. So in summary, I wrote, Timmy is so desperate to defend his own chosen quote-unquote branch of CTGX because he has defended his status as the ledger guru, and because he's also the admin of the CTGX community. So of course, people will be asking him what's going on if my prior call had been saying that there's a bad branch and it happens to be the branch that you guys are following. So instead, he's now claiming that the other side is a CTGX cabal, not the side that he's following. The side that he's following, which includes OPRX, XNOR, Sorobon, is all connected to the KTalk, the WQCF wallets, and they're all safe, they're all legitimate assets. So my question to Timmy is, who verified crypto-G owning 1 billion Bitcoin? And even though we've already debunked this notion of the Department of Defense wallet, why do you keep pushing that narrative? It's a false narrative. And guys, if you didn't know this, which I'm not sure if the CTGX community is following this information or not, because Whiplash has never posted it. Seems to be only we and QSI have posted it. But Sinjin and I had done a massive deep dive into the Stellar SEPs, right? The enterprise proposals. And in those, we talked ad nauseum in so much detail about how all the developers, in order to prove legitimacy, especially other domains going forward and other assets going forward, they have to show proof of custody. So which white hat, legitimate QSFS developer in their right mind would use a program like Stellar Mint, which is, it belongs to Daniel of StellarMint.io, instead of minting it on their own domain protected by a quantum server? So it literally makes no sense, guys, that any quote unquote white hat developer would do that when literally every single other white hat that we've worked with have used their own domains on their own servers to mint their own tokens. And of course, he also makes a claim that WQCF is tied to, again, maintains the liability of USDC token. No, it doesn't. It has nothing to do with USDC. I would like to see the documented evidence from USDC themselves proving that they have any affiliation with the WQCF wallet. So I asked Timmy, this is my invitation to you, Timmy, right now. This is my invitation to you, Timmy, right now on this call. When you're working with all these different assets on all these different domains, how do you actually verify who they are? What is your KYC process on any of these tokens or any of these developers? Because so far, all I've seen is you take a narrative that those developers are pushing out on social media, and it seems like you're not doing any verification process whatsoever. So it really makes me wonder how much research you're doing into all this information. Now, Timmy further then talks about how there's something called the Onzo account now, and that's overseeing the distribution of X and NOR, which ties to Mobius, and it's connected to Jed McCaleb himself. Again, who is telling you, Timmy, that they're connected to Jed McCaleb? Did you verify this with Jed McCaleb? I wonder, I question that. So if they're telling you they work with Jed McCaleb, how do you prove that they're working with Jed McCaleb? Are you just taking their words as fact? And then again, he reiterates, Crypto G is Crypto Russians. The Crypto Russians were originally led by NPM, who claims to be JJ. But he also says that the Crypto Russians were led by John Miller and Kirill. And so they're directly on the Q team. No. I never said that. I said John Miller and Kirill are on the Q team, and NPM was contracted in because he was, an insider. That's how he knew so much information, but he was never on the Q team. And that's so important to know because there's a massive distinction between saying you're on the Q team and you're just somebody working with the Q team who's been cut off. And then he starts saying some random nonsense about, will the team openly promoting the Rothschilds' Great Reset actually be John Miller and Kirill? So, Timmy, I hope that I'm misinterpreting your words, because it certainly seems like you're suggesting John Miller and Kirill are black hats, and they're the ones who are tied to the Rothschild, the cabal version of the Great Reset. And then further, he says, is the compromise within the SCF, which is actually not even correct, guys. It's not the SCF, that's the Stellar Community Fund. I think he meant to say the SDF, which is the Stellar Development Foundation. So he's saying, is the compromise within the SDF ongoing, or do the White Hats have full control, as we've been told? Massive implications are here if the White Hats do not have this under control, especially if one assume those wallet connects to the bad players. So I can confirm this for you, as I have for over a year and a half. The White Hats are in control of the SDF. However, there are still people who work there, and the people who work there are being monitored to see if they will come around and they will change and they can be quote unquote saved, or if they're all going to be exposed, arrested later on. And I have proven this in multiple calls and multiple posts with Ben for the last year as well. So they have control over it, but it's not like they control people like clones, guys. They see who's working there and they basically say, this is your order. Can you fulfill your order? And if not, at some point, we'll take you out. This is the same thing, guys, as the Lobster server that we have proven White Hat Home has control of the Lobster servers. He also has control of the Stellar.expert servers. Dima, Glem, and Orbit Lens are under their custody. However, the people who work for Lobster are still there and they're still doing their jobs. So can you see the correlation between how the White Hats can be both in control of an organization and the servers while giving the employees their free will, sovereignty to go about their business and see if they want to play for the White Hat team or play for the Black Hat team and get arrested. So this is an important concept that everybody should understand, but hopefully Timmy and others in CTGX will also learn as well. So he then says, NPM, presumably JJ, did he leave the Q team, become anonymous to do a PSYOP on the group of hackers they controlled to find the leak to the cabal, a PSYOP inside a PSYOP, or was he the leak himself? I have said this countless times already on this call. I've also said this countless times on the MOAD call. I've said this countless times for almost an entire year last year. NPM is a black cat. He is not a good guy. And he is not part of the white hat narrative to catch the cockroaches. He is the damn bloody cockroach himself. And we have proven this for months and months and months. Therefore, yes, he is the leak himself because he was contracted to work with the Q team. And then because he's a cockroach, they found out that he infiltrated these projects. And that's why we had Project Bridges. So again, my question is, not just to Timmy, but to everybody in QSI, outside of QSI. When you're studying a project, how are you KYCing the devs? How do you do any due diligence on these projects? Do you just read whatever nonsense they write and you accept it at face value? Or do you actually spend the time to go and do your research and connect the dots? Because so far, I haven't seen many people actually KYC. I've now seen, luckily, Nick did a Master D class, so I should have put your name on there. I'll fix it, Nick. But Nick did a Master D class confirming who Ralph Amars is and his role within SPIA and did it with public documents. When I was doing my KYC on Ben, I also only used public documents. So guys, it is very possible to KYC developers without having to work with them or talk to them, because that's what I had to do before I ever started working with the developers. I thought this was also very interesting because, as many of y'all know, we no longer associate with Stellarpreneur. And one of the big reasons is because he actually banned all of us and removed us from his admin team at the behest of somebody named Rick Barron. Rick Barron, for those who don't know, used to be part of our core admin team. He was then hijacked by the Cabal, predominantly Troy, Spartan, and Joan of Arc. But they are, of course, under Miriam, Rocky, Juan, all those players. So it's basically the same cockroach team. And after Rick fudded out, he went to go join a group called Twisted's Corner, which is made by Twisted. And a couple months after he joined, or maybe a year or so after he joined, actually no, Twisted's Corner didn't last for that long before. So it would have been a couple months after Rick Barron fudded out, we noticed that Troy and Joan of Arc actually joined Twisted's channel and started corrupting all the people in Twisted's Corner. So Rick Barron is the one who influences Stellarpreneur to ban all of us, remove our admin, and then instead put Rick Barron himself in as admin. And as soon as we learned that Stellarpreneur had fudded, that's when we cut ties with him. And he separately messaged me and was like, we didn't like how you handled things with Annie. Well, the reason why we disassociate ourselves with Annie is a similar story. Annie does tremendous work. Is she always right? No, of course not. Because when you're trying to read energy, energy changes all the time. But overall, Annie had done really excellent work. However, Annie, like Stellarpreneur, his name is David, started getting in bed with all these cockroaches, people like Rick Barron, others. And they started becoming darker and darker. Not that they ever fully flooded. They weren't out there calling us scammers or anything. Who knows if that'll happen in the future. But their shift in focus started changing over time, and they were no longer actually making a lot of sense. That's why we disassociate ourselves with Annie. But one thing I wanted to kind of highlight is, because I have admired Annie's work in the past, when Stellarpreneur posted this repost of Timmy's message talking about, is the SDF compromised, etc., Annie's response to it is, based on my intuitive reading on the aforementioned account several times in different ways, I nor my colleagues who I asked them to do blind questions got that the NPM account was JJ, meaning, again, she's also confirming from her angle because she doesn't read our information. She has no idea what QSI is doing, but she herself also confirms that NPM is not JJ, okay? And she also wrote, we all got that there were consciousness challenges that needed significant work. There was no frequency match whatsoever. And then in terms of the SDF, she also said that she believes that it could be used for nefarious activities. So I don't know exactly which wallet Timmy's referring to, if he means is SDF itself still, infiltrated with cockroaches, or if he's referring to a specific wallet in his long chain of wallets. I'm not sure, guys, but whatever direction it is, the answer is yes. I can confirm that on top of what Annie's saying here. And of course, she's also saying crypto Russians, she says, when I check in, I get that crypto Russians are not our Q group from Northern West Virginia. So it's kind of a two-part thing. Yes, of course, now we know Q group is not from the Army of Northern Virginia. That's the theory that I used to prescribe in. I used to talk about it all the time, because now we know the Q group is actually the Russians themselves. But what's also important is she's also confirming from her end that the crypto Russian community, the developers, are not part of the Q group either. And this is important to know because Annie is very well respected within Stellarpreneur's channel. And because those guys are not following the QSI information, they probably didn't see our MOAD. But Annie's confirming the same things that I've said. So I'm hoping that what she's saying is getting through to those people who have no affiliation with us. So here comes the boomerang, because January 6th, a couple days ago, Timmy again posts, what is Aurochs? They're connected to Crypto G. But more importantly, he says, incognito admins, you can't help but expose yourself, LOL. Glad you're paying attention, because this stuff is for your attention. You know it's above the heads of most people in here. Well, I'm sorry to say, Timmy, but you've exposed yourself because you've now proven that the CTGX family of assets is also above your own head as well, because I've shown through a series of all your posts that you didn't understand CTGX well enough, and so you've literally been leading the entire CTGX community down the wrong line because you've been following all the scammer wallets, telling people that they are the legitimate wallets. January 8th, again, a couple days ago, I won't read all this. I just want people to see. They can come back and review the slides. But it shows you how he does a breakdown of how everything's tying back into Elon and into the E-assets, into the X token, etc. He's explaining how everything works in their business relationships and this and that, not knowing, guys, that this is all 100% fabricated. And it's not because Timmy fabricated the evidence. I want to make clear, Timmy is not the one that's creating these stories. The CTGX team, right? The developers behind the X token and the NOR token and the Sorabon token, the ARCS token, they're the ones who are saying all this bullshit. And people like Timmy and others who did not KYC the developers are just believing in, and they're parroting all these false narratives. So that's why it's so important. You have to KYC the developers. Otherwise, you're literally just following scammers all day long and putting them up on pedestals. So because Timmy is so heavily entrenched in the CTGX community, and we already know that most people don't know how to read the ledgers, now all the other admins and the other people in the community are going, oh my God, that's amazing. Thank you for all of these ledger documentation and all these proofs, and your research is outstanding. Well, they don't know that they're following incorrect research. So literally everybody in the CTX community is cheering on the scam assets, not just one person, but the whole community, which involves thousands of people, are cheering on the fake assets, which are all scam, which are all under money laundering assets. And again, guys, this is why in QSI, we do not believe in pedestal worship, because I will be the first one to admit that I used to put WIP on a pedestal, and look where that got me. It got me into a big disagreement with him because when I started to do my own research, my research started to debunk his false narratives. So anytime anybody says anything, you must do your own research to validate what that person is saying. Never take it blindly, because anything that people do is all about integrity. And how you do one thing is how you do everything. So if you have a history of lying or twisting words or misconstruing information or misinterpreting the facts, like what WIP does, then you're going to get all this garbage nonsense that comes out. And I've proven now, using Timmy's own words, that he didn't properly understand our Moed video. So again, guys, I don't know if he didn't understand it because he saw the video and he didn't understand it, or if he was just following somebody else who wrote a synopsis on it and he was basing it off of the synopsis, which again then tells me that he didn't do the research actually into our own video, because he should have been studying the video to get the truth of it as opposed to relying on somebody else giving a summary. So let's go to Rick Barron and Noor for a quick second. This won't take long. Guys, keep in mind, Rick Barron and Noor of the Sea are also admins of the X channel. And here they are again, spreading disinformation. Rick is saying, oh, Noor and Oryx are company tokens. Oryx is a representative of a contracted company. They're all about developing the AI engine for all this. And so that's how you validate things like CTGX, OPRX, Noor, XX acids, Sorobon, E acids, etc. Guys, they have nothing to do with E acids. This whole connection with the actual Elon Stellar, the actual Elon Musk, has been completely fabricated by the scam developers. And yet that false narrative is being parroted by all the admins themselves of the X community. And here saying, Noor is a representative of the entity called Satoshi Nakamoto. No, Rick, why would you say that? Again, guys, back in October 2022, Satoshi Nakamoto himself said he has nothing to do with the project. Why do you guys keep using this false narrative? Well, I forgot to put it in here, but I actually eventually found the reason why I did this, and it's something that anybody can go and actually do the research on. If you go onto Twitter, which is now X, you can see the CryptoG account, their official, CTGX account, and you can see that it was created, I think, around June of last year, something like that. And they claim, because the username on it has Satoshi Nakamoto in the handle of the link, they believe it's Satoshi Nakamoto because it just happens to say Satoshi Nakamoto on it. But if, anybody could write any name. They could write Bigfoot. They could write a unicorn. Would they then believe that a Bigfoot or a unicorn is in charge of Noor? And in that CTGX account on X, there's just that one post, and they pinned it. And there's only one word on that tweet, and it says Noor. So that's the reason why the CTGX community believes that Noor is tied to Satoshi Nakamoto, and they're using that one tweet as their proof, even though they never KYC'd the Twitter account. So I'm kind of bashing my head in here, and I've probably repeated myself for 50 billion times by now. But if you're not KYCing every single account you work with, and every single developer and every single asset, how can you make such claims? Because your claims are not backed by any substance. It's just like if, Stellar Russia, Stellar VBRF, like all these guys that we work with, suddenly there's an account that pops up on Facebook or on Twitter, and they claim to be them. I'm not going to go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. It must be Ben. No, I would say, hey, Ben, do you now have a new, Twitter account that you didn't tell me about? Then he would tell me yes or no. This is the same thing with QSI. There are literally tens, if not hundreds, of fake QSI accounts across Signal and Twitter and other Telegram accounts, even on Facebook, on Parler. None of them are me. I'm literally only in Telegram. So anybody pretending to be anywhere else is obviously a scammer. I don't understand how they don't understand this when we've been dealing with this kind of drama and scam nonsense for many, many years now. So here we go. This entire CTGX community has basically fallen into the trap of believing a scammer, because a year and a half ago, I posted information about the KTalk wallet, and everybody was upset with me because I was the only one who questioned it, saying, hey guys, I think it's a scammer. And because I said, I think it's a scammer, they all said, we're not going to trust you. We're going to trust Timmy instead. And we're going to do our own research. Like Stellarpreneur also did his own research, and they all got to the same conclusion. Well, guys, if you're not reading the ledger correctly, which is what I've been claiming, then you're not going to get to the right conclusion. Because again, the wrong facts will get you to the wrong conclusion. So to go back to the Bridge of Bridges call, because I've kind of walked you through the second half of last year into the beginning of this year, I want to go back for a quick second. Our Bridge of Bridges call with Mimsy, again, was in August 27th. And leading up to that call, not only did I review the information that Timmy had sent me, and I had done my own research into this, but I'd also asked Ben about it as well. And many of you may remember this screenshot from that video. And here's the information, because this is the information that I also sent to the CTGX community, not all of it, but some. The one on the very right screen, that was the information that I sent to the CTGX community back in March of 2023 or 2022, I believe, one of the 2 years. And I wrote that WQCF belongs to KTalk, who probably owns QGWL, and I believe they're all scammers. And I wrote, all of these different wallets down here, and I posted that into the Stellarpreneur channel so that everybody in the community could see the research that I was doing. And I was showing that those wallets tie to the same wallets that connected with Juan, who is one of Miriam's little minion generals, and he's also tied to KT. So literally these wallets are tied to the cockroach scammers. Why would they ever take that as proof that they're part of the white hat team? I can assure you there's no white hat that I work with who are in any way remotely associated with those scammers. So I sent that information a long time ago, but again, nobody believed me. So they continued to believe in the KTalk wallet. So I sent, the same information over to Ben, and this is from August of last year. And I wrote, oh shit, I just looked at the original CTG token, which was minted again on stellarmint.io and is asset on the ledger, and how that one is created by this wallet and how it's tied together. And basically I'm showing him this web of scammers that I'm discovering, and, showing him like not just which wallets belong to which wallets, but I'm also telling Ben that either this ZJ2V, which is connected to the KTalk wallet, because I showed you here that it's ZJ2V is a wallet that created the KTalk wallet, okay? So ZJ2V is connected to KT Miriam and One. And I wrote, that's clearly not a legitimate developer. And then I wrote, Crypto Cypher's Twitter account is the one that convinced the entire CTGX community that WQCF is the official main distributor of the CTGX assets. So that's when I told Ben, and I also mentioned on our August call, that either Crypto Cypher doesn't know what the hell he's doing and he's terrible with the ledgers, which is highly possible, or he's part of the scammers and he's intentionally leading people astray, knowing he's developed a whole army of staunch CTGX followers who will then do whatever he says because he's the main guy on Twitter who claims to be in direct communication with these developers. So when people were busy doing their token swaps, he was the one saying, hey guys, send all of your tokens into this WQCF wallet. And what ended up happening? Well, that was a scam. So people would send their assets over and send their, basically send their assets over to oblivion. It was going nowhere. So I wrote all that, and then I posted it in the call, and I said, I tried to warn them in March. It looked very, very shady. Nobody listened to me. Pretty sure they are all mistaken. And Ben gave a little heart to that, acknowledging my information. Now, I didn't post this next slide during our Bridge to Bridges call because I wanted to see how everything played out. But I'm going to show you what he said to me in response. So in August 14, again, this is 2 weeks before our Bridge to Bridges call, I asked him to grade my theory, and he said it's definitely closer to 70%, but I don't think the wallets are linked, but possibly they're connected in another way. I said, okay, well, sorry, let me caveat because this is not on the screen. Not only did I talk about the CTGX related wallets, I also talked about there are 2 specific wallets that I believe are tied to SDF themselves through Stellar Quest. And if you guys are not familiar with Stellar Quest is basically like this older community that's developed games within Stellar to teach people about Stellar. So it's kind of like a fun way to learn about how blockchains work within the Stellar ecosystem. But they have actually been endorsed by SDF themselves, and they have their own sub-channel on the official SDF Discord server. So they're fully entrenched within SDF, which we know is overrun by all the cockroaches. Anybody can pop in there and see it's just cockroach after cockroach spamming messages in literally the SDF Discord server. So Ben's saying that he doesn't know if it's definitely tied to the SDF wallets or not, but it is possibly tied in a different way. And I said, okay, well, it was just a hunch of mine. But aside from the SDF wallets, what is my understanding of the individual messages regarding the CTGX stuff? Because people have been asking me for CTGX updates for a long time, and I usually just ignore that because I have more important things to do. And he wrote, I would say you're pretty spot on some things, and I'm very interested to see how they evolve. And I wrote, just, to clarify, do you mean that my CTGX is pretty spot on? And what about the NPM character? Is he an asshole, or is he actually an insider or turncoat? And again, guys, I wrote this in August before the MOAD call, before I was able to really truly understand the nefariousness of NPM. It wasn't until December I was able to confirm how much of a slimeball NPM truly is. And Ben said, yes, that's spot on. Again, it's not big news because you're you. So I wrote, if I post that CryptoG are all the test assets and they're all going to get cheesecaked, I won't get in trouble, right? And he's like, no, not in the near future. And I said, what about the distant future? And he goes, no, by the distant future, they will already know all of our names and all of our faces, which means that they were already expecting to then unmask themselves, meaning the Q team and the Stellar developers were already getting ready to unmask themselves. So here, guys, I'm confirming from Ben himself, again, not just a Stellar developer, but literally on the Q team and the leader of the BRICS developers. Ben is the one saying WQCF, ZJ2V, and the KTalk wallets are indeed scams. And that theory of mine was spot on. And he wants to see how the story of CTGX evolves over time. Now, I didn't mention this on the Bridge of Bridgers call, guys, because I also wanted to see how everything played out. And I knew it was going to be way too controversial to mention everything on that call. I wanted people to do their own research into it. So I left it somewhat open-ended, even though I already knew the answer. And now I go back to, we are the storm, the patriot fight. I didn't have to use his intel. I didn't even have to use Timmy's intel except for 2 screenshots just to show the connections of all the different wallets because I already knew the answer. Ben already confirmed the answer that the ones that they're following are all scammers, including Nor, because Nor is tied to those same scam wallets. And this is the reason, guys, why Ben never rescheduled that call with us, because we were supposed to discuss all these beta testing assets. But if you're in the middle of an operation and you're trying to figure out the direction of where it's going to go, you're not going to come out and give the, let's call it, official update, because the update is still in the process of being discovered. So he wanted to wait to see how it played out. So let's start wrapping everything together now. Back in May, I didn't realize the significance of this message. But in May, I wrote, oh, Shuvalov, I'm sure you're familiar with the Q plan. I laugh now because I didn't know he's literally part of the Q team. But I said, WIP believes that the Kennedys are at the top of the Q team and John Jr. is #1 in control of the Q team in all of the white hats. And that was really important because that was kind of at the height of all this NPM controversy. Because back in April is when Whiplash and I formally cut ties with one another. And this was just a couple weeks after that. And Shuvalov's response to me was, I guess this will be a complete disaster for him if he will understand JFK is not talking to him. So I'm just going to go through a quick recap of this because, again, this is from the mother of all decodes, or sorry, mother of all declass calls from the end of last year. But we were able to confirm that NPM is indeed a dirty cabal infiltrating cockroach. His name means marked by evil or obey a tyrant. And his tagline is the world wants to be deceived. Or sorry, his username rather is the world wants to be deceived, so let it be deceived. And his little minion, Marianne Chambers, is also part of this entire scam operation. And she's the one who's also Whip's best internet buddy. She's his confidant. And so literally the scammer pretending to be JFK Jr. and his assistant, Marianne Chambers, both infiltrated Whip many, many years ago, long before I ever met him, when he was still in Facebook and Twitter. NPM, the Satanic Cabal scammer. And back then, I was already showing people how NPM is tied to KT Miriam Rocky and all. And I also speculated that he could be tied to the scammer developers like Australia Mines, Mayers, Vittel, etc. Because again, guys, if you're following the timeline, if you've been with us in QSI for that long, October of 2022 to April of last year is the height of the controversy surrounding Australia Mines, Mayers, Vittel, and all those domains, because they were working with the developers, both SPIA, excuse me, both SPIA and BRICS acknowledged that they were working with them and they had all passed KYC. But then suddenly, and that was in the summer of 2022, they had passed KYC. That's when WIP was promoting their assets. But then in October of 2022, suddenly both sides, SPIA and BRICS, said, okay, we are no longer affiliated with them. They're actually all scammers. WIP never believed that narrative. He continues to work with those scammers to this day. And they are all tied to NPM. So now we're starting to see the web of all the scammers come into the matrix. Another confirmation again from our MOAD call. Ben basically confirming that because of NPM, not Whiplash, but NPM himself, that was the reason to spur the Project Bridges. So for anybody who has not yet studied Project Bridges, which we've been talking about since March of last year, it's when you move legitimate QSFS assets off of their original servers, aka domains, onto a new domain that's controlled by the white hats and not by the infiltrators, to ensure the security of those assets for the future, because those new assets will be the ones that are backed by all the physical assets that have been tokenized onto the blockchain. So that's going to be used for the proof of custody in the future to then confirm that the value is the true value. So that's really important, guys, because we're looking at the timing. Remember, the scammers took control of Mayers, Vittel, Australia Mines beginning in October of 2022. And then by March, we have this interview with Ben, and Ben confirms Project Bridges was needed. And from October until April, we were doing token swaps, massive amounts of token swaps. So they're all overlapping on the same dates. And of course, we mentioned on the MOAD call, who and where is NPM? Well, I didn't mention it on there, like on this slide during that call. Actually, I'll get to it in a different slide. But White Hat Home, guys, has been tracking this NPM character this entire time, most likely since October of 2022, when he started to infiltrate and become a cockroach. So not only has he been tracking him, he's been eating popcorn watching him escape from city to city in just the last couple months, right? Like this post is from December 22, and White Hat Home is saying he doesn't have a stable home. He told me what country he lives in. He says he doesn't have a stable home. He's trying to run, living between different cities for the last 1 to 2 months. You can run, but you can't hide. So guys, they're literally just tracking them. They're waiting for the go to actually make the arrest. But until then, they're monitoring everybody and they're seeing where all the money is flowing to, both on chain and off chain. So I am happy now, in hindsight, to actually confirm that NPM is actually the Australia mine developer. And this was confirmed by Shuvalov and Wyatt Hat Home and Ben, which I forgot to put on the screenshot. And so this, guys, is really massive because this confirms that NPM is not just behind 1 or 2 scams. He's literally behind almost every single major scam that we've seen on Stellar, as is Miriam. And I've already proven that NPM works very closely with Miriam and King Troll. And for those of you who are not aware of this part of the story, back in 2021, when King Troll was still part of our channel, and he and Miriam were actually part of our executive leadership in those days, KT left the East Coast. He went to go stay with Miriam for about a month or 2 or so. And they told me that they were dating. Now, at the same time, Whiplash told me that King Troll was actually John Jr. And it got very interesting because KT would tell me information about, what Whiplash would like to do in the future, but it was actually information that Whiplash had only ever told NPM and myself. So how could KT know this if I didn't tell him and Whip didn't tell him? It had to come from none other than NPM. Second point of fact is, after King Troll left Miriam, who lives in Denver, he fabricated the story, actually Miriam fabricated the story of how he should come to Texas. So lo and behold, as they're planning for him to arrive in Texas, I'm sitting here going, hey, Whip, do you actually think King Troll is truly John Jr.? Because that would be freaking cool if he was, because I would get to meet him in person. But if it's not, then who is this guy? And Whip was like, no, it's definitely John Jr. There's no doubts about that. So KT flies to Texas. I go meet him. It's a whole story behind that I won't get into on this call. But through this story, the people in Houston will know this, and they can confirm what I'm saying right now, our Houston quorum. I was trying to get KT out of my life, out of QSI, which was known as GQX back then, out of my apartment, out of everybody's lives, actually. And the person who continued to encourage him to stay was none other than NPM. And one of the big things with KT is not only did he have ties with the actual Illuminati, but he also had 2 open arrest warrants out for him and an ankle monitor. And he had been arrested for abuse in the past. Sorry, battery assault in the past. So obviously I want him out of my life and I want him out of the channel. So why would somebody with that history, if you're claiming to be John Jr., want him to stay and encourage him to stay with me? Now, in hindsight, obviously, I know it's because they're all part of the same team and they were trying to corrupt me as they had corrupted Whiplash. So I include this quote from Sun Tzu in The Art of War: you strike at its head and you'll be attacked by its tail. Strike at its tail and you'll be attacked by its head. Strike at its middle and you'll be attacked by both the head and the tail. So guys, this is important because if you understand how military strategy is done, the military never attacks from just one side. They attacked from all sides, at all angles, with all sorts of weapons, because they're either trying to overwhelm the enemy or they're trying to corner them and push them in a certain direction. But that way they have control of every single battle, not just the whole war, right? They want to control every single piece of that to ensure victory. So what the Black Hats were trying to do is they were trying to control all the pieces. They infiltrate every single channel on every single social media platform. That way they can brainwash every single media influencer, but especially in the Q movement and also in the Stellar movement. And not only that, but even the people outside of Stellar who are in the RV community, who are in the Ascension community, right? It's like every single subcomponent of conspiracy theory you can possibly imagine, they've all been hijacked. Not because people willingly want to be hijacked, but because these black hats are so cunning in their strategy that they pretend to be your friend and they pretend to help you, and slowly they climb the ranks and they all become on the admin team. And this is no different than any other channel that we have exposed and disassociated with. And you can see this across any platform, any social media, you can see evidence of that. But likewise, if the black hats can do it, so can the white hats. So they've literally been saying, stay calm, have patience, because when we strike back against the cabal, it won't be a little chicken peck fight. It's going to be one and done. We're capturing all you MFs and you're all going to jail. And this is all going to be finally cleaned up before the true public mass launching to Stellar to the world. And that's also when those triangle signs will be lifted off of a lot of these assets and domains, which have already kind of started. I think people have noticed that in the background. So what are the white hats doing? Like the Marines, they improvise, adapt, and overcome. So if we walk through a bigger 40,000 foot view of the timeline, Crypto G, which is Crypto Bank, which is in charge of crypto Russians, they come and they get contracted by the Q team. And they're contracted to mint these assets, which were supposed to be the CBDCs, the official ones. But 1 year later, the projects get hijacked. And starting in October, we realized that they're all cockroaches instead. So the cockroaches have taken control of Crypto G. And that's why there was that big switchover back in 2021. And since then, when that secondary team came back and said, hey, we're still using the same email address, it's still us, we're still here, that was already the scammers. Then you fast forward and you realize that every single side of CTGX has been corrupted, but along the way, the white hats have been trying to figure out, how do we rectify the situation? Because there are so many tens of thousands of trust lines now. That's how big this project was, because that's how influential they were, being one of the first legitimate Jacera projects. So it's not a small deal to then take over and try to course correct along the way. This is a massive undertaking. And all throughout 2023, they're trying to figure out what is the most efficient way possible. So here, quick update on Orange Man. December 26th, I tell Shuvalov I'm making my presentation for the Q Team D class tomorrow. I'm preparing for people to flood out. By the way, was Orange Man NPM or working with NPM? Is that why he's also gone dark? Because he made Whip too many false promises and he broke your trust. Shuvalov says he didn't meet our expectations, so Orange Man got tossed out the window, just like all the other scammers. That's why Orange Man has not been around for nearly a year now. So if you're expecting Orange Man to come back, don't. If you're Whiplash and you're still abiding by Orange Man, forget it. He's part of the scam cockroach team. So then I send my theory on NPM to Kirill. This is December 28th. And I wrote, okay, guys, I think I finally understand the strange dynamic that NPM has. Because remember, I knew he was corrupt, I knew he was cabal, but I didn't know exactly how he fit into the bigger picture. So he was another indirect collaborator with you guys, meaning the Q team from the beginning. That's why he got all the intel about both the Stellar assets and the Q plan. And he was simultaneously, between himself and other people on his team, was giving out disinformation narratives. Oh, I'm sorry, the opposite. The Q team was giving out disinformation narratives to their contractors because they wanted to see which of the contractors would leak information to who. That's how the Q team found out that both NPM and Orange Man were cockroaches, because the false narratives that the Q team fed to them were the ones that were leaked over to Whiplash. So then, of course, they could tie it back to NPM and Orange Man. And so I wrote, both of them failed. They both turned into infiltrating cabal cockroaches, and they are smoked out of the team. And the discovery about their infiltration was made around August to September of 2022, which is why Ralph and Bricks told Whiplash and myself, stop working with Australia Mines, Mayers Vittel, because they're all scammers. And now, in hindsight, after 1 year of investigation, I wrote, NPM is one of those scam developers, and possibly multiple people are using the NPM account to create the scam matrix. So Whip was warned, but he didn't listen to the developers. He didn't listen to me or anybody else who tried to talk to him, and he kept working with scammers. So meaning like Clownda and Scam at 1, Scam at 2, etc. But he was also unknowingly working with NPM as a scam developer. And separately, he was also working with NPM, the Telegram account, which pretended to know nothing about Stellar, and yet at the same time was trying to mint a massive scam token called the Kennedy token, which he was trying to claim would be all the, I think he said the Soros gold would flow into his Kennedy shitcoin, essentially. And NPM, also very cunning, was trying to avoid minting the token himself. So he was actually asking Ben and Shuvalov to mint that asset for him. And they're both like, you're out of your freaking mind. We have nothing to do with you now. So they both completely ignored him, and he's frantically searching for another developer to mint because he didn't want his own wallet to be connected to that asset. He was trying to create a layer in between. That way, theoretically, he wouldn't be discovered on the ledger. But again, guys, when you're the white hats and you can KYC across multiple ledgers on and off chain, you can see who is connected to what, especially when you can connect them to their real identities behind the scene. Now, again, I want to reiterate that Miriam does the same strategy. She literally creates an army of people to create liquidity pools on Stellar. And she sends them out to do her bidding. So she's collecting money on the back end in the liquidity pool. She's also connecting money on the back end of minting all the shit coins that people either buy into or are swapping out of. And then because there are so many other people now making liquidity pools instead of her, she thinks she can't be caught on the decks because she thinks the white hats will catch the first, maybe second layer of the liquidity pool makers, but not get to her. Well, sorry, Miriam, they're already on to you, and they've been on to you since before I even worked with you. So you're on the shit list too. Now I keep reading, which is why in the March interview with Ben, he told us that he knows there's a mole in the team. I assumed he was talking about Whip, but all along he was talking about NPM and his gang. This is also why Project Bridges started at the same time to secure all the domains and the tokens. And Ralph said, yep, 100% correct. So that's when I sent him an, kind of the follow-up, well, thank you, because that then validates all my theories about NPM and how NPM is connected to all those other scam developers, not just Merriman, Katie, and Rocky, but even the Stellar SDF scammers, the Stellar Expert scammers, the SDEX SDEX Explorer scammers. And then he's also tied to Jeanette and Annette, who are Scam at 1, Scam at 2, and Clownda, because now we know that NPM is freaking Australia Mines developer who is scammer number 1. And I send the same information over to Ben, and he says, yeah, you're basically kicking ass again. And in hindsight, I do have to make an apology to everybody. I wrote, Ben, does this mean that I unknowingly created the term beta testing assets, but at the same time, all of you developers were okay with it because in the beginning, those CBDCs really were the correct assets. They were supposed to be the correct CBDCs. And that's the reason why Whip got so confused, because when he was trying to get confirmation, he got confirmation from NPM, John Miller, and Kirill. And at the time, pre 2023, that was correct information. But when all this unveiled in 2023, as all these scam developers started coming on and getting unmasked by, Q Team and SPIA, that's when I started questioning the narrative. So behind the scenes, guys, we were all in a developer group. It was all the Bricks developers. Even Ralph was in there for a brief time. Whiplash and myself were in there. And we're going, hey guys, what the heck is going on with all these assets? Because some people are confirming it and some people are not confirming it. And he forwarded into the channel an old message where John Miller had confirmed those domains. And he said something like, according to the activity on the DEX, they seem to be the correct domains in terms of being legitimate CBDCs. And he used that message to try to bully Kirill into confirming it as well. Because at first, Kirill said, I think that they could be. But then, because, now knowing that Ben is the main, kind of the head of the BRICS team, he was deferring to Ben. And Ben and Shuvalov were like, nope, that's not. And Ralph was like, nope, those are not either. So Kirill took a step back and he actually undid his confirmation of those domains. But Whip doesn't seem to understand that. And so he continued again with that false narrative for many, many months. So again, I apologize, guys, because I'm the one that created actually the false narrative that they're beta testing assets. They were never intended to be beta testers. They were always intended to be the correct ones. It's just that when they became infiltrated, they had to get cheesecaked. And so without even understanding that I created a false narrative, it became a cover story for beta testers. It became a lesson for all of us to learn that a legitimate token or a legitimate domain can get cheesecaked away for an actual one that's protected by the white hats. So kind of in summary about NPM, he is a Khazarian cockroach responsible for Scamfest. He is a Q contractor turncoat, and this cockroach is connected to 4 of the major scam groups in all of Stellar. And those of you who had listened to our interview with White Hat Home a couple months ago, he said of all of Stellar Decks, there are 4 main groups of scammers. So I'm now spitballing here, guys, but I believe the 4 are, the first one is KT, Miriam, Waki, and Ron. The second one, Australia Mine, Mayor Sconvittel. And of course, now, that on Whip's channel, they've introduced like 10 other fake developers as well. They can all get lumped into that same category. Number 3 is that fake Department of Defense wallet, which is not Department of Defense. It's just a wallet that happens to end in DOD. And that's the one responsible for a whole bunch of shit coins that are being airdropped like crazy. It's also responsible for a bunch of the scam liquidity pools. And then you have group number 4, CTGX, NOR, X, Anonymous, everything. So at the end of the day, both directly and indirectly, NPM is connected to every single major group of scammers on the Stellar Decks. So this gets really interesting for me because when you start looking at, again, the bigger picture, I went back and I was like, when did Cheesecake Project actually come out? February of last year, in the height of understanding that one day we would have Project Bridges. So all this infiltration started in October. And how did the White Hats respond? Instead of attacking them directly, they created a solution. And the solution is, let's come up with something called Stellar Cheesecake, which is an official SDF project but it happens to be programmed by Rostec. And as everybody knows, Rostec works extremely closely with Ben. So Rostec is programming Stellar Cheesecake, the official version, not the beta testing version that is on Stellar's domain. But they're putting out this information. And back in February, so this is actually 2 days before SDF had their webinar and was going to explain what Stellar Cheesecake is all about, I actually discovered the true purpose behind it without even hearing the information, just because I read a couple paragraphs on the website and I was able to piece the information together. And I wrote, you heard it here first. I believe this is the beta test. This is beta testing the future of Stellar clamping down on blockchain criminals and simultaneously make it easier for we the people to mint legitimate assets for our future businesses and organizations. And one of the big reasons is because they're going to almost, they're going to control the way that assets can be minted in the future. It's not like now where anybody can make anything and they can write whatever they want to on the TOML file and they don't have to back their assets by anything, physical or anything value. They can just mint it and make any false claims, and so be it. And so I wrote, because the SDF talked about how there's going to be smart contracts and the smart contracts will be used to burn tokens, I go, oh, okay, so this is how we're going to clean up the decks. Because you can use the smart contracts to instantly get rid of tens of thousands of scam assets. And that would instantly clear up a lot of those crazy airdrops and a lot of the crazy minting that's going on. And then when you put the condition that you have to then back your new asset that's being minted by your proof of custody, that prevents all those scammers from even minting an asset because they have no custody of any true assets. So again, I wrote that 2 days before the actual SDF webinar came out. And what happened is 1 month later, I was messaging Ben and I said, hey, what's up with all your domain migration across? And it wasn't just you, but a whole bunch of the other developers were doing it. And I said, I'm not buying into the cyber attack story. I don't mind posting about it, but I don't believe it. It seems to be more like this, the matrix is getting reshuffled as multiple teams align behind the scenes and maybe new management steps in, possibly old ones are arrested. And he says, I can't stop loving your intuition. And I was like, you're not going to give me any more information than that? And he goes, okay, of course there was no cyber attack, but building a new world requires new ways of storing data, more than just servers. We call it project bridges. So that was the first time the concept of project bridges had come to my attention. And when he mentioned that, I go, oh, well, that cyber attack, the fake ones, which are not actual cyber attacks, they were just infiltrations. All of this happened after Stellar announced their cheesecake program. So I told Ben, my theory is the sandbox is going to force a restructuring to clean up the decks. And how did he respond? He responded, we are indeed trying to create a massive system containing each and every single piece of information that we could put together so far. And yes, precisely, I am familiar with your cheesecake post. And it's also a security reason. We do not trust anybody at this point more than ourselves, and we do not wish to risk. So guys, that's really important because I didn't understand the consequences of it back when you told me in March. But he was referring to the NPM infiltration and all the other scammers that NPM works with. Again, NPM and his merry band of scammers that caused Project Bridges, they also caused Stellar Cheesecake to be created. And behind the scenes, one interesting thing that people may like to know is that back in April of 2022, Shuvalov actually reached out to me to establish contact. But those of you who know how insane my inbox is, I actually never read his message. And I never read his message until Whip made some kind of comment, and I went to go check to see if Shuvalov ever messaged me. So I found his message almost 2 or 3 months later, and I wrote him back to apologize, going, I'm so sorry I missed your message. How can I be of service? And he basically ignored it. And he ignored all like the 10, 15 messages that I sent him afterwards. until March. Because March, again, guys, right before they announced Project Bridges, after they've announced Stellar Cheesecake, is when they could confirm that WIP had flooded. So they were looking for a new partner. And that's probably the main reason why Shuvalov came back and said, hey, how can we start to work together? So I give the quote from Art of War by Sun Tzu, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. And again, I refer back to, you don't attack a snake by just the head or just the body or just the tail. You let the snake destroy itself, and or you attack the entire thing to just demolish it once and for all. And that's literally what the White Hats have been doing with not just NPM, but all the other scammer developers as well, especially when you interrelate it to KYC. So why am I finally saying all of this now when I could have said it many months ago? Guys, you have to remember that there is such thing as free will. And when people aren't willing to do information or do the research themselves, then they tend to attack me for my information because they don't believe me, because mine challenges their very narrative. But the reason why I decided to make this presentation now is specifically because of this. A couple days ago, We Are the Storm, the Patriot Fight posted this. You know, how investing works, do as much research as you can, blah, blah, blah. At the bottom, he said, furthermore, an ecosystem is being built. From the emails, it's called possibly Crypto G DEX, not 100% decided. We are investors just like you. So We the Storm is telling everybody in the X channel with 2,000 people, which will then get shared across to all the other Crypto G channels, which, you know, include several thousand more, that the scammers behind CTG want to create their own DEX. And if they create their own DEX in the same fashion as how Lumen DEX and Stellar DEX, which are by the Lumen DEX developer and the SPIA and SDEX developers have been doing, there is the possibility for you to implement it, for you to log in and activate your wallet and use your wallet by inputting your S key, aka your secret keys. So that's why we always say, don't put your S keys anywhere. But if you trust the developer and you know and you can confirm that they are not saving your S key, then it's okay. So for instance, like Lumidex was the first one where you could log in with the S key. And because I work directly with Alex, the developer of Lumidex, and Ben works directly with Alex, I trust him. So when he says that he's not saving the S key, I believe him because I believe Ben. But over here, Crypto G wants to create a DEX and they want to do a version that could potentially steal your S keys, and all the people who are in the Crypto G community who believes in these emails, which are coming from, yes, the Crypto G developer himself, but they don't realize they're talking to the scammers. So if the scammer developer is directly telling you, we have a new DEX and you can do this, and you can, you know, input your S key and we won't save it, I don't freaking trust them because they're scammers. All they do is lie and manipulate. So because of this information, I sent it over to White Hat Home and I said, oh my goodness, Twisted's Corner, the NOR groups, the CTGS groups, WIP's channel, they're all now using my information from the MOAD call, but they're twisting my words. And they're saying that NPM is actually the guy in charge of the Q team, or he's even above the Q team. And now they're using that information to justify that CTG, aka CTGX, aka Crypto G, is legitimate. And he's like, oh my God, those dumb idiots. And so I said, I think I need to do a follow-up D-class call on this, hopefully before the scammers release their launchpad and steal everybody's key, S key. And White Hat Home gave me a directive. He said people should be warned as fast as possible. And I was like, crud, because that's January 2 and I have all this other work to do. And he goes, yeah, it sucks sometimes. Sometimes I want to put my hands down on all of that what we're doing. But when I remember how much people will be saved from our work, I feel that we need to work even harder. That's how I get my passion and energy. Working for the people is the best possible thing. So guys, the white hats are literally saying, no matter how much work you have to get the truth out, even if it destroys other people's narratives and their belief into a false system because they're too stubborn. It's better to give the information knowing that it's real and help save the people who are willing to be open to listening than to hold your thoughts, keep your thoughts to yourself and let everybody who's innocent in the CTGX community get scammed by the biggest scammers on the decks. So guys, that's the difference between me last year, even though I knew it was a big scam, in August, before our Bridger's call, because of sovereignty and free will, I didn't say anything. I wanted CTGX team to do their own research and figure out for themselves why I've been calling it a scam for a year and a half. And then, because of earlier last year, Ben was saying, hey guys, it's okay because we're going to cheesecake everything in those. He didn't refer to the CTGX assets. He was talking about the quote unquote beta testing CBDC domains. So the now fraudulent Vietnamese dong and the dinar and the ruble, like, all those domains, he was able to confirm that earlier last year, those would be cheesecaked. So again, I didn't freak out because most people in QSI know that cheesecake is a very powerful thing and it helps you be able to reclaim the value that you put into the asset if you did so unknowing that it was part of what ended up being a scam. But because White Hat Home gave me a direct order, I then felt that I had to share all this information on today's call. So I do want to confirm now that because of all the crap that the White Hats have had to deal with trying to figure out how to rectify the situation last year about the CTGX assets and how many different assets they are, instead, they're just going to cheesecake every single thing. So that's why I told him, Ben, I think instead of you moving CTGX over to your server, because it's completely been infiltrated by the cockroaches, their crap matrix has become too big, involving too many shitcoins, and the people who are in QSI, for the most part, have already cashed out of them long ago. So even if you try to save them by moving them onto your server, it's practically pointless. And there's just too much drama right now for it to have lots of faith in the future. So I think it's easier for you to cheesecake it than for you to try to recover those wallets through account abstraction and then try to clean it up. And that's when he was able to confirm, yeah, we're going to cheesecake everything. It's the more reasonable route to go in. So then in preparation for this call, I wrote, oh man, this next presentation is going to be epic again. I crossed out destroy. I wrote, I'm going to obliterate the CTGX cult of scammers. Because again, guys, the CTGX cult of scammers tie into NPM, the biggest scammer on the decks. And they tie into the Kabbalists and the Illuminati on the decks. They're all working together hand in hand. And he wrote, that's my girl. So I want to come back to the 2PNY wallet for a quick second, because this is the one that Whiplash keeps referring to. Remember, I showed you earlier how he said, oh, eToro is part of the sting operation. No, you fool. It's not. 2PNY is the actual sting operation, not eToro Forex. eToro Forex is a scam domain that got swooped in and busted by detective who's using 2PNY to catch all the criminals. There's a huge difference between the two because you're trying to imply that the scam domain is actually detective's operation, and it's not. It's literally just a scam domain. Guys, you have to learn how to read the freaking ledgers to understand this, or just read detective's words and don't misinterpret his words for once, and then you will also come to the same conclusion. So I wrote cockroaches tagged, waiting to get bagged. Now that I've revealed all this information to you guys, this is a direct question to the admins of the CTGX nor X channels. The ball is in your court. What are you guys going to do next? Are you guys going to continue to believe in the scam assets and continue to promote the scam assets, now knowing that confirmed by the Q team themselves, this is all money laundering? Or are you going to apologize to the whole community and tell them what's real? Or are you going to sit there like you did last time and say, Emily's out of her mind, don't believe her, believe us instead because we're the ledger gurus? So my summary of findings, Shuvlov wrote, the truth speaks for itself, fostering trust effortlessly. And I think that's so apt because even though this investigation has taken me a year to do, I think I've shown you enough proof using the words of and the own research of the CTGX community on top of my own research, on top of other people's research, on top of the Q team's confirmations that every single piece of CTGX has been infiltrated and it's all a bunch of scams. So first, Crypto G, not Satoshi Nakamoto. Stop perpetuating that lie. Crypto G is anonymous on YouTube. They are George News on Telegram, but who's behind that? NPM, who I have now nicknamed Notorious Prison Mate, because White Hat Home was able to confirm that he's going to arrest NPM and unmask him to the world next to Whiplash in Times Square on the big jumbotrons. Crypto Cypher, again, guys, either he's a bloody idiot and he sent the entire CTGX community down the wrong line into all the scam wallets, or he's part of the scam team. I don't know. I don't work with him. I don't know anything about him other than he's full of shit. So he's either a disinformation agent or a misinformation agent, in which either case, it's no good and they're giving you the wrong information. Again, I shared all this back in 2022 and nobody in the CTGX community believed me. So now, a year later, year and a half later, I hope they do because they're going to get their asses handed to them in the cheesecake process. So NPM and his cronies, cockroaches, were contracted by the Q team. Again, for the 10 billionth time, they are not the Q team. They are the people who are insiders. They infiltrated all the developer teams across all these different organizations I've just shown you. And now White Hat Home is monitoring them. So they hacked the legitimate projects. They are the ones that caused Project Bridges. They're the ones behind with fudding. They are the reason why Orange Man also got removed, because Orange Man somehow is involved in all of that nonsense. Probably another cockroach. I accidentally coined the term beta testing assets, but in the process of making up that name or that phrase, I learned so many lessons about cheesecake and its possibilities. And more importantly, I secretly discovered how big this money laundering scam ring actually is. NPM is Australia Mine developer. He works with all these freaking scammers across all those freaking wallets. Both branches of Crypto G are scammers, no matter if it's the original version or the new version or the version with NOR, doesn't matter. Every single version has been infiltrated. Every single one was going to be the legitimate CBDC tied to crypto Russian, which would have been the e-ruble, and they would have been the legitimate assets backing Indus and Indus Gold. That's why the White Hats tried to save them last year, but they watched how everything played out and they decided it's too much bullshit, it's too messy, it's easier to simplify, let's just cheesecake everything. After our mother of all D classes, it proves that Timmy did not pay attention to the call. So either he didn't listen to the call and he misinterpreted it, or he read somebody's summary, which was incorrectly done, and he didn't do his own research to actually listen to the call. And because he misinterpreted the information, He then created all the false narratives behind CTGX and how they are quote unquote the Q team and how it is the biggest domain in all of Stellar. It's the most important one. And because of that information, he was able to influence WIP, influence all the CTGX related communities. And because nobody knows how to use the ledgers as well as him, at least in that community, nobody questioned him. So I'm now wondering, why did the CTGX community reject my discoveries for 2 years? Somebody should have questioned something. Somebody should have learned to go and read the letters themselves, so they would have also figured out that this was a big scam. It shouldn't have just been me. It should have been every single person doing their own research and figuring it out. It's a scam. So now we know, based on all the screenshots of the words of the admins themselves, they're the ones who are out there pushing the same false narratives. All these people also belong to Twisted's Corner, which has been hijacked by Troy Spartan and Jay, because Spartan and Jay are a married couple, which are a sub-branch of Miriam, the monster Kabbalist cockroach. Therefore, the Twisted Corner at some point this year, in the next couple months, will be squashed like a bug during social media bridges. It also proves that nobody in CTGX community actually KYCs developers. They just assume that everything is factual. They don't do their own research on it. And the information that I share with you today, guys, is not my theory. It's literally been confirmed by Ben, White Hat Holmes, Shuvalov, and Kirill, which is half of the Q team. So yes, again, White Hat Home requested that I expose all this to warn everybody ahead of Crypto G DEX, so you guys don't lose your ass giving away your S key, but hopefully not just about the DEX. Hopefully everybody wakes up and they realize that Crypto G is a freaking scam. And it doesn't mean you need to go and mass sell out. You probably won't get very much out of it right now unless you're the first one to cash out, right? That goes back to the understanding of liquidity versus illiquidity. You can keep them because you know they're all getting cheesecaked. And if you're not part of the money laundering scam, then you'll be okay. You'll get your money back and you can reinvest them somewhere else later on. But if you're knowingly part of perpetuating the scam, you're going to get zero back because that's the rule for cheesecake. So now you guys can really see the power of Whiplash and Timmy misinterpreting information, and they're perpetuating scams. And not only are they perpetuating them, but they're now the poster boy of these scams. That's why you must pay attention to details. I cannot stress that enough. If you misread, you misunderstand, you should go back and reread, rewatch, relearn, ask for clarity, because otherwise your misinterpretation is getting shared because you guys are the biggest influencers out there in that community, and you're sharing incorrect information. Do you even know you're doing that? I don't know if you're doing this intentionally or unintentionally at this point. But after today, after this call, if you continue to perpetuate these scams, I will know you are intentionally perpetuating scams and you're part of the cockroaches. That's why, guys, again, if you don't study PsyOps, you don't study Stellar Sting Ops, you don't study Stellar, their technology, and all the updates, you miss the bigger picture because you're not seeing how all these scams are getting squashed like a bug and how all of the scam developers are tied. They're all in bed with one another. It's so easy to see once you see the bigger picture. But if you are so obsessed with only focusing on one asset or one domain, then you miss all of this, especially if you don't KYC the developer, because all you know is whatever bullshit narrative they're feeding you. So the only way people can truly do research is if they keep an open mind. That's how you stay unbiased to the truth. Stop using your ego, because your ego will make you unable to hear new information. We've talked about this in countless Wednesday panel calls and other calls. I could post information that I feel is correct at the time, but then months later, days later, or maybe years later, I can then find out that that's actually not the right information. And what do? I apologize, I make a post, and I confirm, sorry guys, this was my old intel. That's actually not correct anymore. I did the same thing with XRP. I thought XRP was the one because I believed everybody else, and in my own research, I also thought XRP was the one. But over time, I learned it's not the one. It's the freaking little birdie, the canary, that crashes and becomes the phoenix, that stellar that rises, right? And that became one entire year of trying to teach this one theory to everybody. So you have to be willing to drop your ego and admit you made a mistake and then move on with the truth. And that's the only way you can build trust and integrity with people. So again, guys, how are these admins and how will the communities within the CTGX bubble react to all this information? I don't know. Time will tell, but I can tell you, not only the white hats, but we have eyes on everything. So I'm very interested to see how this plays out in the next couple of days, weeks, and months ahead of Cheesecake and ahead of social media bridges. So moral of the story, DYOR, no freaking pedestals, because Whiplash the pedestal, Timmy the pedestal, has led everybody astray. And you have no one to blame but yourself because you didn't do the research to corroborate if this information was even correct or not. You can't play the victim with us, guys. So, line in the sand. Today, a couple hours ago, Timmy posted, I try to stay objective. I listen to every source and every side of any situation I'm trying to get to the bottom of. Like any good dad I would do, if he's wanting to discern the truth, understanding the four sides of every story, his side, her side, the truth as it's understood by listening to all sides / the real truth. And he concludes, I stand out because I have the courage to have questions. Many of you have followed me down this path because I try my best to logically put together the information presented, and I continue to dig on anything that doesn't seem right. Love all you guys that continue to ask the hard questions. The search for truth will never end. Well, Timmy, I'm not trying to bust your balls. I'm just showing people the words that you've said yourself that you believe in. And I'm letting you know that the theory that I had 2 years ago has now been proven true. And I've now proven, with the help of the white hats, that 100% of Crypto G is going to become cheesecaked because 100% of Crypto G is a scam. So now that you've seen that there's a different side to the story that you believe in, a side that is being validated by the Q team, where will you stand? Will you come out as an honorable man, a seeker of truth, and a real patriot and say, I'm sorry, guys, I've led everybody astray. I didn't mean to. That's just where my research led me. But now that I've seen the proof, all the evidence that's been shown on the decks, all the confirmations by the Q team, I now reverse my course on CTGX and NOR, and I now disassociate with them because I know they're scammers. Or will he continue with his story? I don't know. I guess time will tell. So in closing, credit roll, the lead cast of characters are these guys. NPM, Timmy, We Are the Storm, the Patriot Fight, Nor the Seawork Baron, Clownda, Crypto Cypher, Stellarpreneur David. The supporting cast, thank you so much to Hasnab, Freaky, Annie Kalakar, Nick, our 5+ general, Dylan, Deb, Rich, 9, who is named Gina, that's actually Tyranne's wife, and the person known as BN, because this middle bar here, highlighted in pink right now, are the people who have shown the evidence on top of my own research, right? So a plethora of people have all shown the evidence that those are scams. So it's not just me, guys. There's a whole bunch of people who have done their research. So I hope CTGX community understands the magnitude of what they're dealing with. Because again, this is a big community with tens of thousands of trust lines. And our cameo, of course, thank you to Ben Whitehat Home, Shrivlov Kirill, Ivan, AKA the Q team. Now, before I turn it over to our panelists for their comments or their questions, I want to reiterate, cheesecake is a real thing. It's about burning bridges, but it's also about helping people recover assets that may have gotten, let's call money laundered through scam tokens. So if you want to learn more about cheesecake, there's plenty of information on QSI. We've done plenty of calls on this as well. Rostec, if you will learn the background of this massive developer company out of Russia, they basically help with nearly everything in the world at this point. But it's going to help save a lot of people who have believed in this false narrative for so many years. So if you're still holding onto the assets, don't worry, it's okay. Just continue to hold on to them unless you feel like you can get a fair value on a swap or a trade. That's cool too, right? Like you can place a market order on the DEX and see if it fills, because other people who don't believe in this information, which is the truth, maybe they'll buy your scam tokens. But regardless of which direction you go in, if you're still holding on to these assets, it's okay, because you will have cheesecake to save your ass. And cheesecake is a very interesting project because Stellar BBRF minted it, which will be the real version, not the one that STF has painted on their website. That's the beta testing version for the public to understand. But I, now knowing, even more about the Q team and who they are, I'm even more just mind blown, because the original name was called Cheesecake with a regular CAKE. But because of the influence of our community and our trust that we've built up with the Q team themselves, they decided to honor us and mint the asset as Cheesecake with a Q, AKE. So that just shows you what kind of partnership we have with the Q team and how much mutual respect there is between all the different teams. So last slide for today, Stellar PsyOps and Sting Ops. I love this picture from Leon. I've used it a couple different times. And it's like, people get so confused because there are so many PsyOps and they lose track of which PsyOp. That's why you have to look at things from the 40,000 foot view, because you have to see all the PsyOps, not just one or not just 10, but all of them. And then over here, you have Colleen, who unfortunately also footed out a long time ago. But she said, all I can hear in my head right now is PQ saying Stellar Sting Op. And just like that, everything is about to come full circle. Bless your heart, it must be like herding cats. Yeah, sometimes it really is. Ivan said, remember, Stellar is the cosmic connect the dots game. If you cannot connect the dots because you do not know how to play the game, the PsyOps game, the Sting Ops game, you'll never put the pieces together because you're looking in the wrong direction. And Ben, oh Ben, he wrote, I have to be honest, I chose this career path because I've always liked in-depth analysis investigations. Yeah, so do we. I think that's why we all get along, because it's truly only the people who have put in tens of thousands of hours of research to arrive at the truth, just like everybody on today's panel, that you'll be able to find the truth. If you're part of the people who think, I'm too busy with life or with work or with kids, I don't have time to do the research, you may end up being the one that gets scammed because you put yourself in victimhood mentality, thinking you don't have the power to actually make these kinds of decisions. You have to create the time for this, because this is your future, your financial future, your humanitarian future. If you go down the wrong path and you follow the cockroaches, and now you're part of the cockroach team, you're gonna get blacklisted. You'll be arrested. You're gonna be thrown in jail, just like Whip and NPM and all their merry band of cockroaches. So thank you guys for indulging me in this long D-class, but I hope I finally kind of put all the pieces together for everybody, and how CTGX ties into NPM, which ties into all the major scams on the DEX. Of course, there are other smaller baby cockroach scammers out there too, but I'm talking from top down, the major players of it. So that being said, I'm going to end my screen share and go to the panel and see how you guys have reactions to it. So,
Wow.
Who's going
Nick, do you
first?
want to go first?
Okay. Wow is good. Is a good description. That's a good description. Gonna have to watch this again as usual. But no, it was very, very in depth, and you lay it out like we always do. You lay it out all in order with all the proofs and everything else. The interesting, sorry, one second. Can you hear me? Okay. The interesting thing that you mentioned about, White Hat Home saying to get this out quick, aside from them stealing these secret keys by doing that, they also can have their own decks to have their own launch pad to launch their own assets by themselves. Nobody will back check them or any developers because they won't be affiliated with them, and people will believe it's legitimate because it's CTGX. So on top of it, not only will they steal your secret key, but also they'll be minting God only knows how many assets saying that they're affiliated with this new DEX. And yeah, I didn't know some of the connections again because I think I probably just came in right when things were happening because you guys were in the process of throwing them out when I first came in, so I didn't really know the history. But now I see it. Now I see it, obviously. With the original CTGX now, from what I remember when we were doing it, they had that countdown clock, and they said everybody's going to get like $25 per token or something. And then that day when it counted down, the domain went down, and we said that the domain was attacked. Now at that point, was it still a legitimate asset, or by that time was it already infiltrated?
Do you remember what date that was? Because there's two possible timelines of infiltration. One for sure would be that October 2022 at the latest, right? It could have been like August or September as well, because that's when we heard about Maersk and Australia Mines getting infiltrated. But the other timeline could have been before that, when the original CTG got changed over to CTGX. But I haven't been able to
The
confirm
original, I
that.
think it was the original one, because then they did the swap into the other one, the OPMX or something, and they wanted you to swap into that and then into the other
Yeah.
stuff.
So
So
correct. By
maybe it
time,
was a legitimate attack initially, a
correct.
DDoS attack, and took the site down. But then nothing ever happened after that. It just continued to decline, and they swapped it, and you know,
Exactly. So by time CTGX had swapped over into OPRX, that was already part of the scam because that was already past the infiltration timeline of when NPM took control of Australia mines, etc. Right. And that's because that started in most likely August, September, because that's when we got warned. So it could have even been before that. But that's when Whip and I were told by the White Hats that don't trust Australia mines, Maersk and Vittel, right? And now knowing that NPM is part of that team and the CTX team, you put it together. And
right.
that's what we had
But Whip
like,
still trusted them. I remember that was you guys were going back and forth, that he still believed that they were the legitimate developers.
yeah,
It's all based on the fact that he believed that this MPM guy was JJ and that he's legitimate. I don't know how he comes to that conclusion with aside from what you presented, all the evidence out there in terms of what he said and what he's connected to. I don't know how you can link to that, but like you said, he's I don't know what caused him to go over the edge. But no, yeah, it's a great presentation, and it's good. Now you're calling them out. Now you'll see who's really honestly made a mistake, who honestly didn't realize they made bad research. We all do it. It happens. We make mistakes. That's okay, as long as you come forward as be a man, step up and say, I made a mistake. I apologize to everybody. I'm wrong, and you should follow this new information. So it's good. Not only you're warning people, now you're calling them out, and you're gonna see who's cockroach and who's not a cockroach.
yeah, and keep in mind, guys, like remember when people are being energetically hijacked, what seems like logic to them is not logic to people who are not hijacked. And that also causes a lot of chaos and confusion because you can't get logic through to them. They will reject it.
Right.
That's why no, like anybody who tries to talk to Whip, unless you are part of the cockroach narrative and you basically just prop him up on that pedestal and you believe everything he says, he won't listen to you. You give him all the facts with the evidence, and he's like, he twists it.
Yeah.
So,
One other thing that you mentioned, NOR and OPMX, and people have been talking about NOR lately a lot. So what you do is you also have the ability to manipulate prices to get people to believe that what you're telling them is the truth, like Nora's been running all, so everybody's like, oh wow, look, Nora's going up. So that, unfortunately, people, when they see that kind of stuff, their emotions get the better of them rather than saying, I better check this out first. They think they're missing something, and all of a sudden people start hopping on board because you're manipulating the price intentionally to coincide with what you've been telling them. See, look, it's going, and now it's go. That's how you suck people in. So, if you, that's why we always say, if you see things moving, erratically, even if it's in your favor, don't act emotionally, all of a sudden start adding to it and doing without finding out what the reason is and why it's happening. And you probably could see that by the trades. If you look at the trades, I can tell right away when something's being manipulated just by looking at the trades that go off. So that's something to keep in mind for everybody as well.
Mimsy, looked like you wanted to say something earlier.
I mean, this was a fantastic presentation, and of course, I was here back when KT came on the scene, and I know his mode of operation. I watched it. I could feel his vibrations and everything, and I knew once NPM and once all this went down with Whip and everything, I knew that Whip, or not Whip, KT and Miriam were all connected. I knew it. So all of this is not a surprise. Like I knew all of them were connected because that's just the way they operate and how they came in. And it's like pattern recognition because we saw how KT and Whip and all those admins that came in and they infiltrated. Well, they do it the same every time. And we've seen it over and over and over again. And we see how they came in and yes, NPM hijacked, Whip. They did it with the Q team. I mean, they literally were infiltrating the Q team, and thank goodness the Q team saw it and stopped it immediately. But the Q team, because they know they wanted to see where the money laundering was going to go. So, I think a lot of people might be, well, if NPM was a part of, or excuse me, he was not a part of the Q team, but he was a part of he was contractor of the Q team. You'd think, well, wouldn't they arrest him on the spot? I mean, they had the power. No, they wanted to see how far it went. They were tracking. And so what they did, they also used, I see this as a good thing also, because they used what NPM was doing, what KT was doing, Miriam, all of them. They started tracking, and that's how they started writing these protocols and all these things. They knew this is how they're doing it, and we've got to stop it. So while yes, it was a bad thing and that they were scamming, but it was in the long run, I'm kind of grateful because now we know all the tricks, we know what they're gonna do. And so I think the Q team made the best of a bad situation. And I'm one of the ones that sent my CTGX to the thing because I know when we were doing send your assets back to this and you're going to get reissued, and they were doing a lot of that. So I just assumed that this was one more of those because it had been confirmed. So I kicked myself because I didn't do research, but because I didn't realize which developer was behind which tokens. Like, I didn't realize, oh, NPM is behind the CTGX and all these others. If I'd have known that, I'd have been like, heck no. I'm going to try to sell this and get as much possible as I can for it. But I thought, oh, I'm going to, send it back. After all this, it was just like Nick just went through. And, we started out with CTG, then we switched to CTGX, then it was OPRX or whatever it was. And I swapped to OPRX, and then I was like, I don't think I should have done that. So I ended up switching. I waited until the exchange rate was a little more favorable. I switched back to CTGX, and then they were like, well, you can send the OPRX or the CTGX back to us. And then once I got rid of it out of my wallet, it was like, this is so, I felt better because I felt like that chaos was out of my wallet. And, you know, at first I was like, am I ever going to get anything back? And my thought was, then we were supposed to get the X token, and now it's the Noor token. And I thought, if I ever get any of it back, I'm selling it immediately, because I knew they had a fan group. And I thought, I'm not a fan. I've got so many other assets out there. I'm not a fan. I'm just going to trade it off and, invest what I have into an asset that I feel good about, because I no longer had felt good about that. And I guess I understand completely now why. But, you know, just looking at this from the outside in, for those people who are still trying to say, that WIP is not working with scammers or whatever, you have to look at the patterns, and look at the patterns of what, just like you talked about earlier in the call, when you were talking about how Scamat 1 and Scamat 2 and Clown Dough, they were all defending these other developers. That's how you knew they were tied together, because why would they care? Why would they be defending eToro if they are with Australia Mines? Like, why would they care? Well, they care because they're connected. And so, and why are they pushing this whole narrative? Because, and supporting, CTGX or anything else that they're doing. Why would they do that? Because they're connected. And I intuition, pattern recognition is massive in this. And I have to hand it to you, Emily, and on how you were able to look at that. And it's like, as soon as you start seeing those patterns, once you catch the pattern, they repeat over and over again. And that's exactly what has been going on.
I do have to say, and I totally agree with your comment earlier about how it's not necessarily a bad thing. Because again, guys, for people who are in technology, they will understand the term penetration testing, pen testing. And so it's like you develop a new technology and you want to know how well it works, but more importantly, you want to know how it breaks. So typically you have a team inside, like let's say your developers who are trying to break it, but then you also need an outside group, whether it's customers or whatever. In this case, part of the pen testing are the scammers, because the white hats need to know, how are the scammers creating all these loopholes to get around whatever the rules are. And if they're creating all these ways to manipulate the system, we then need to create a way to block that in the future stellar version of it. So despite all the bad, it creates a lot of good, just like what you're saying, because it's so many lessons learned of what to do, what not to do, and how you prevent against that. And when it comes to pattern recognition, I am blessed because I did have to work so closely with the cockroaches, Miriam and KT. Because if I hadn't gotten all that background knowledge about how to actually, mint a token, well, all three of us did it through Stellar Mint, which is how I know about Stellar Mint, by the way. But not only how we mint a token through a third party, but then how do you ICO it? And then because KT remember he was launching all those tokens at like 1,000,000 XLM, and then it would crash the price point. And he didn't care, he just kept doing it over and over. I knew it was scamming at one point, but I had to confirm him by confronting him in person about the intention behind that strategy. So I'm glad that I never followed his path. Miriam followed his path, and that's how you're able to also deduce that they're scammers. But that and so many things, liquidity pools, the way that you set certain trade orders, the way that you monitor the DEX, a lot of that stuff I learned because I had to follow their nefarious activities. So I got to see the mind of a criminal. So when I was looking at the KTalk wallet, all I could see was that's what KT and Miriam do. And the freaking KTalk wallet is tied to KT and Juan's assets. How much of a clear sign can that be for anybody? Again, white hats would not care to ever follow shitcoins. Granker, you want to add something?
Yeah, you and I have an experience with, other channels that got involved with this. And it's funny how through this journey you find out when people are lying, I mean, just lying and then they get caught and they add another lie on top of another lie and they keep spinning lies until they're so painted in a corner that they can't get out of it. And then they lash out at you. And that's what Whip did. Um, Unfortunately, you know, we all get in certain situations with certain people, but then we find out what their alternative motives, ulterior motives were. And then when you catch them in their lies, they don't come clean, and then they spin another lie. And what you've done and what we've all done is we've proven to the people our point. And thank you for what you've done. I know how much time you put into this, and it's amazing. And I know that you work your little booty off. Um, I can't be thankful enough for everything that you do and what the White Hats have done. And people need to understand that, you know, I get this all the time. This has got to happen right now. And Nick and I did a show with Susanna earlier today, and there's a lot of people saying they're frustrated, you know, they've had enough. They don't know the level of infiltration that has happened in every aspect of our lives, including in the financial world. And in order to catch everyone so we don't have any issues, we have to go through all this disclosure. And it's really hard. I get it, you know, but we're in a war and people need to understand this war. And if we were to just turn the spigot on and everyone's asking about liquidity, it's when's the liquidity going to happen? We got to get rid of all the cockroaches before we can even turn on the spigot. And you know, I know in my life, um, you know, there's things that have been going on where it's very similar to what you were going. I mean, just finding out facts on, you know, people lying to you, not telling you the truth, and having a motive to benefit themselves. And that's not what we're about on QSI. What we're about on QSI is, you know, true sovereignty. And true sovereignty is being humble when you get things wrong and saying, you know what, I screwed up. I made a mistake. I apologize. I'm sorry. I'll do better. I promise you. Living with integrity. You know, integrity is everything. The whole world of the 3D world that we are coming from, there's no integrity. You know, we've been all lied to. And we're all guilty of it. We all got into our white lies and everything. We were part of it. I mean, but we're coming into a new world, and QSI is all about proofs, about coming clean, and all about the truth. And if you're not going to be truthful, then you can't be honest. And if you can't be honest and truthful and be humble about it and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm going to do better. You know, I don't know what else to say other than I'm disappointed in Whip. I'm disappointed in some of those other channels that keep supporting Whip because all we've done is proved our point over and over. And, you know, this is all about cleaning our souls from all the evil and going into a new world with a clean soul. And these guys, they deserve everything that's coming to them. So thank you, Emily, for everything you did there. So
Yeah, I want to add something, a couple of things. You learned, like you said, pattern recognition from Miriam and KT in terms of how they manipulate stuff. The manipulation that they do is the same type of manipulation that they do in stock market. Okay, especially with penny stocks because they're illiquid, which is what we talk about in a liquid market. So, for example, I was looking at one of Juan's tokens, their Tread, where it looks like it had volume of I don't know how many millions of dollars. Yeah, you own the whole float. You trade between your wallets back and forth itself, and it looks like you're creating volume. There's no volume there. It's make believe. Okay, because he owns like 99.997%, and when you own the whole float, you could do whatever you want. Nobody can attack you. Nobody can short. Nobody. So you see these people. What they do is to try to get interest in their tokens, not just him but others, where they have two wallets, or that may not even be their own. It might be one and a friend, and they go back and forth between each other. They sell the tokens to each other. They move it up a little bit, and then people start to see that. Unfortunately, like I said, they get excited because they see something going on, and they think that there's something, and that's how you get sucked in. So that's something that, we should probably talk about again in the future. But the techniques they're using are the same that I've seen in the market by all the scammers in the market, that especially the penny boiler room, penny stock houses. That's what that they did exactly the same thing as these people are doing. The other thing was I want to mention in this another scam to watch out for is within the Stellar bot. I noticed that they're sending very very minuscule amounts of tokens in there with memos saying this is live now, this is this is good or it's ready to go, and then when you go and look at the wallets and you look at the sites, they've made up fake sites that look like real. So there was that one QSIC, looks like it's connected to QSI and like it's a finance arm of QSI. If you follow the wallets, the trail of the token to the website, so they've set it all up where they have fake websites set up. They're sending in these tiny things with these intriguing memos. So people say, "What does that mean?" Let me go look and see, because I looked at a few of them, like, that's interesting. And they have websites set up, so that's a way to suck people in, because it's since it's going into the Stellar bot, people think, oh, the Stellar bot, that's ours. So, it must be only something affiliated with us, not anybody else. But I've noticed some of the tokens lead back to like a one of Juan's wallets and another one, and there's these tokens, Kafaz and all these other things that are being sent in there intentionally to try to hook people into getting involved. So I would make a suggestion to you, Emily, because you guys know the history of all these peoples. Maybe you can make a wallet list for us of all the scam wallets and who they belong to, so that when we see a wallet, well, I don't mean like now. I mean, but over time, maybe you can just put together a basic list. So if we see a particular wallet, we can say, wait, that's Juan's wallet, or that's Miriam's wallet. It may be something to do over time, but it would, because a lot of people don't know how to read the ledger that well. So they don't know whose wallet belongs to who. So it's just as a suggestion. I know it's probably a big job.
It's actually, it would have been a good suggestion, and it actually was a good suggestion back in 2022. You guys might remember that I had a call where I had Rocky as our guest speaker on, and I was doing a deep dive auditing his wallet and a couple of the other people who are cockroaches.
There's no point. They close and open new ones, right?
Correct. So what happened is I exposed all their wallets, so they closed it down. Back then, okay, so many people either got into Stellar in 2021 or 2022. I'm talking about the vast majority of people right now in our communities. Back in 2021, you only knew how to trace a wallet by saying, oh, that was created by, so it must be in the same lineage. But what ended up happening is I discovered that was actually fraudulent. The reason why is it's whatever funds the wallet that shows up as created by.
Right.
So let's say if Nick has an ABC wallet and there's an XYZ wallet, if I accidentally fund his or intentionally fund his, it'll actually say that I created Nick's wallet, even though I'm not Nick. And most people didn't understand that. And then on top of that, back in those days, they didn't realize that they had a nemesis in me because I was tracking their ass. So they would just create their own side wallets to then do all the scams on. And as soon as I expose them saying, these 10 wallets all belong to Rocky, they changed their tactic. They off-ramp, they went through another exchange, they on-ramp, so I can't trace them.
Yeah.
Detective, White Hat Home can trace them, but I can't. So that's why it's not really necessary to do that. So I'll just do the same thing.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, we know they're being tracked anyway, so regardless. But people should watch out for that scam with these tiny amounts. I've seen it happening a lot, and they're doing it into the Stellar, because I had asked you, can you just deposit it in anybody's wallet? And you said, yeah, you can. So they're making it appear as if it's coming into the wallet, and the wallet tracks what we do legitimately. So then they throw these little things in there, and people say, oh, what's this? What's that? And then next thing you know, you start looking, and it looks like they're legitimate sites, but they're not. I saw a lot of them are tied into to their wallets. So just something to be on the lookout for.
Yeah, and I want to go back to something you're addressing earlier with the penny stocks and how multiple bad guys, whether themselves directly or their minions, they're all just trading against one another. Yeah. And they can also create fictitious accounts or fictitious assets to then trade against one another. Guys, that's the main reason why I discovered K-Talk was a scam wallet. Because one of the most massive narratives behind that is this 1 million Bitcoin in custody. The Bitcoin token they're trading is a scam Bitcoin. It's not the real Bitcoin. And yet the entire CDGX community was like, oh, that's the proof. That's the proof. No, that was proof it was a fraud. So I don't know what else to say about that. The real Bitcoin hasn't come in because we haven't had the Bitcoin bridge.
Right, that's right. It's on its own blockchain, so it couldn't even be in there because it's not, it wouldn't be compatible. It would
Yeah.
have to be wrapped first. And everybody would know about that. They would know about that.
And that's why, guys, I really do think Crypto Cypher is one of the scammers. I don't think he's just a naive influencer who randomly posted it because he was very specific. Follow these, little hashes. And then Solopreneur found those hashes and connected it to the actual transaction, which is brilliant on his move. But then everyone blindly believed that those transactions were legitimate transactions, not ever questioning it. I'm the only one that questioned it because just like what Nick was saying, I was like, that's the same thing freaking Miriam and KT do. What the heck? Pattern recognition.
Yep. Well, I
So,
wanted to go back real quick to, you were telling us that NPM is anonymous and NPM is also, what was
George
the
News, right?
George News. Well, isn't that something? They went, and so this ties all what you just said ties back to Crypto Cipher being possibly one of the scammers. I don't know. I don't follow Crypto Cipher, never have. So I don't really know, but it makes sense in the pattern because what they did was they created sites that backed up what they were saying. Like, in other words, oh, George News said this. So, see, that's proof that we're legitimate or whatever. So, whenever you see anything like that, and you're just trusting, oh, well, George News is obviously John Jr. because he had a backpack that looked like John Jr.'s supposed backpack or something, he's on Air Force One or whatever. Um, you know, they did that to prove or to supposedly prove who they were and that they were legitimate and that anonymous charity was legitimate. Now, go back to me. So are you saying that NPM was the one that did those anonymous videos where they had uh, and they were talking?
I don't know if he's the person behind the voice of the video, but I know he's connected to those because he is the main connector between them, right? That's why Whip thinks that he's talking to John Jr. And John Jr. is the original George News magazine. But did anybody ever question? I mean, even I didn't question this back in 2021, but did anybody ever question, is George News on Telegram connected to George News magazine? Because the magazine, remember when John F. Kennedy Jr. died, that magazine stopped. But it came back, I think it was earlier 2023 or something, but it came back under the direction of what's his face? Trump's photographer. I can't think of his name.
Right, Gene Ho, right?
Gene, what's
Yeah.
his last name?
So,
Gene.
so he's one of the guys running George Magazine. Now, if you think logically, if CTGX was tied to the real George News, why would the magazine itself not post about this to the millions of subscribers? Why would it only post to the thousands of people on Telegram? That itself doesn't make any sense at all.
Exactly.
That's
Well,
how you got connected.
the other part of this is that when I was involved with Ty and Marianne and all those guys when we're doing Channel 203, when I was, oh, you got to get into the room here, you got to get into the John room. Like, do you really think John Jr. would be playing around on Telegram with all the responsibilities that are going on? I mean, you got to be kidding me. And I got in the biggest arguments where I go, where is your common sense? And if you listen, I'm just going to tell you from personal experience, um, people play on your emotions when they lie to you and they hype you up and they tell you a lot of promises. And Trump has always said, promises made, promises kept, right? Well, when people make promises to you and then they don't fulfill those promises over a period of time, then they start bullshitting you with more white lies. And then they keep tugging on your emotions again. And they tell you what you want to hear until you find out the truth that it's been a lie the whole time. So, this everything we've done here on QSI, we've got some things wrong. There's no question about it, but we've always come out and said, you know what, we got it wrong. We were honorable. We came out with integrity. But we never said, well, you know what, we didn't do this. We're going to do this. And then told another white lie over another white lie over another white lie to try and cover up our mistakes. And that's what WIP has done. And that's what a lot of these channels have done. They will not admit because of their ego and their image. And that happens in a lot of our personal lives too. There's a lot of people in our personal lives that are so afraid of their image. They're so immature. They haven't grown up. They haven't worked on their spirituality to say, you know what? I'm just going to say it. I've been fucking wrong. I was wrong all the time, and I apologize. I really apologize. And this is so important to know the truth and live in the truth. I mean, we're learning that, if everyone lived in the truth, if everyone lived in the truth, we wouldn't have all the chaos in our life. We wouldn't have all the anxiety and all the fear, because if we just all lived in the truth, we wouldn't have to worry about it. It'd be simple. Life would be so much simpler if we just lived in the truth. And this is just another
Hard for
example.
narcissists to do that.
It is. It is, and
Almost
and
impossible.
it's troubling because the people that we care about, they get caught up in it, and you can't pull them out of it because their mind, they manifest all this stuff in their mind. They create their own reality instead of the real reality of what's in the real world. So
Well, thank you guys so much for all your comments, because you guys brought out such great points that not only emphasize the importance of it for CTGX specifically, but really for Stellar and trading overall, and just how to be a better humanitarian, how to understand pattern recognition better, how do you improve yourself continuously all the time. So, I mean, guys, if you're part of that CTGX community, any of them, because there's so many of them, it doesn't matter if you got it wrong. Like Crinker said, and like we've said multiple times, we get so many things wrong too. But part of the reason why people have so much faith and trust in us is because we find out that we've been wrong, we course correct it, and we learn from the mistake so we don't keep making the same mistakes afterwards. So I really hope that they will do the same and they'll be honorable to being in integrity. They'll be honorable to being patriots. They won't fall by the wayside and join the cockroaches. And now that I've kind of closed my screen share on it, I'm so happy to see that Timmy's actually listening to the call live right now as well. I'm curious to know how he's going to react to it on his channel or in the CTX channels later on. But I mean, there's nothing against Timmy whatsoever. It's just the research led him in the wrong direction. And because he didn't KYC the developer, he believed what they said. And that's why the first thing you have to do is you have to KYC before you ever start trusting the projects. I mean, it's the same thing in the investment community. If somebody's approaching you with a proposal, you do your due diligence first before you ever invest. That is 101. And if they don't meet the requirements of your due diligence, which Nick's talked about on our prior calls, there are so many different points, and all of these different firms have all their different, strategies and how they rank things, and basically their criteria is massive. If you can't KYC the developers, then the project is bunk. It's only after you KYC the developers that you can say this is a good project. And then because of all the shit that's happened with the scamming and the infiltration, you have to follow the updates. That's the most important thing. Because in the beginning, this was a good project, but along the way, it got hijacked. And if you didn't believe in the infiltration, which we've shown countless times, then how would you know if you got hijacked, or if the project that you're following got hijacked or not? Because you're not paying attention to what's going on in Stellar. Like, why did Cheesecake come about? Why did Bridges come about? Why were all of those tokens going through token swaps between October and April? Everything is overlapping to paint the bigger picture, but you only see it if you're studying it. So Thank you guys so much for joining our panel. Thank you for listening to this very long presentation and very long call. I honor you guys' time. I honor your wisdom, and I hope this helps a lot of people not only put crypto G to bed, but also understand that their assets are okay to keep because you will be able to cheesecake them later and you'll be fine. And everybody else who continues to push the CTGX narrative, now we know what side of the fence they stay on. So we'll be watching. Have a good night, and we'll see you back in chat. Thanks, everyone.